Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to the Sons program. This is our second program, and we have a very special guest today, in my opinion. This man is named Darrell Graf. He used to be the chief of police in a small town that had changed its name, actually, and maybe Darrell might touch on that, as I know it now as Medina, North Dakota. And he was the chief of police there, along with a small police force in that town, as you can imagine. And this was back in February 1983. That was the landmark event, or landmark period of time in Darrell's life that was going to change his life forever to this day. And although it's been a long time ago, many people have not forgotten his story, Darrell's story, of which he and Steve wrote a book called It's All About Power, which you can get at Amazon.com. And hopefully we'll have our little widget up there, and you can order it from our website at thesons.info. And also the fact of a man named Gordon Kahl, who, as it is today, a man who has a beef with the federal government, not the government in general, but the way it's being run. And, of course, he gets whitewashed into being all kinds of dirty-sounding names in the media and by other people who just don't understand him, which this seems to be a big, big situation. You got the guys who are power-hungry, and you got people who don't understand or want to understand. And Darrell knows firsthand about all that. So we're going to welcome Mr. Darrell Graf to our show. Darrell, you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, sound loud and clear. Let's start with, your background. You were, like I said, you were chief of police in Medina, North Dakota back in 1983. And you were how old then?
27.
27. That's really young to think of being 27. And you're how old now? About 54, right?
54.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, so gosh, you were a young guy back then, and you had a lot of responsibility. What other things did you do in town?
Well, I was raised in Medina. My family.
Medina. I'm sorry. Okay, I said Medina. Medina. Okay.
So, yeah. It can be pronounced either way, and both ways are correct. And I guess we just grew up saying Medina for some reason. So I guess that's one way or another. The end result is, if you look on the map, it's spelled the same. At any rate, I grew up there. My grandparents homesteaded in the area. They were all Germans from Russia, homesteaded in the late 1800s, and lots of family. I had 13 aunts and uncles on both sides of my parents, and it was just really, I think, a unique way to grow up in a small community of about 500 people. And although all the aunts and uncles didn't live around there at the time, most of them did, and lots of cousins, lots of relatives, and it was really just a real hometown atmosphere.
So you had a lot of your own family that lived in this small area here in Medina then, right?
Yes, western Stutzman County. Some of them were in farming, and some of them into businesses, and just a real mix. And it was nothing to come home and find the house full of relatives in playing cards for the evening and so on. Just a real nice way to grow up.
The good old days.
And, the good old days. And while growing up, I took a real peculiar interest in the fire service, which I guess a lot of young people do. But it kind of stuck with me, and my goal was to become a fire marshal. So I wanted to get the firefighting background and then a law enforcement background for code enforcement purposes and investigative purposes and so on. And at the time I graduated from high school in Medina, that was my goal, is to become a fire marshal. Well, as time went on, I actually went to another community and became a police chief at the age of 20, a town of a little more than double the size of Medina, but another German-Russian community, so I mixed in fairly well with the people and understood their language. And later I moved back to Medina so that I could be involved with my parents' business, which was an Amoco farm fuel delivery service. So I got to know a lot of the farmers growing up there, and plus hauling fuel to them and so on. And then in with that, not only was I a member of the volunteer fire department, in fact, training officer of the fire department, I was one of the key organizers and founders of the rescue squad. And then I was also a member, and in fact, I think I was president of the ambulance service in 1983, the year that all this stuff went down. So I really, my community, my whole heart was in my community. day and night. I lived it and breathed it, and I didn't go play golf. I went to the fire station and learned all that I could about everything there, everything that had to do with emergency services. So,
well, yeah, everything you did was definitely unselfish because it was all for the community's safety and protection.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And although I did all I could to assist the community, I also wanted to gain all the knowledge that I could so I could progress within one field or the other.
Very driven, very inspired, covering all the bases, very unselfish. A lot of wonderful traits there, character traits, obviously put forward by your efforts and your deeds, as opposed to just the speech that many people seem to follow these days. Now, Medina what kind of community was that? Was it basically an agricultural farming type community?
Yes, like typical North Dakota communities, agriculture is our number one export and commodity. Not only like small grain farms, but also beef cattle, and at that time there was quite a few dairy cattle around, some hogs, but just a real agricultural little community.
And so now the neighboring community too, because Gordon Kahl was from a neighboring town, wasn't he? Ashley?
Yes, he was from a little town of Heaton, which is about 50 miles cross country from Medina.
50 miles. Okay, now that's not really far, but it's far enough to where, you might not be there every day unless you had to work or do something there. Now, would you say all these communities were all similar in the makeup of the community? They're all kind of closely knit?
Yes. From one community to the other, the names change, but the attitudes and the faces, even though the faces are different and the names are different, the attitudes and the occupations and so on are very similar.
Okay. And I live in Missouri. I live in St. Louis, and I grew up in the Midwest between St. Louis and Gary, Indiana. And I lived in those small towns, and there's a everybody knows everybody type of thing, and they're close-knit, and you see the same people pretty often walking down the street and going to school and going to whatever store there may be, especially in a small town like that. And so I wanted to, I'm aware, but I wanted our audience, for those who might not be aware of how small farming communities are in the Midwest or anywhere for that matter, just the idea of the closeness. Not that everybody agrees, not that everybody gets along, it's an idyllic place, but that everybody is aware of the same situations. They know each other's problems, and I imagine since it's an agricultural community, a lot of the farmers, which is what this story involves, had a lot of similar situations going. So now we got your background here, we've got your character down, I think, pretty well. And your community. Let's talk about I guess, the climate, maybe you could call it the political climate or the social climate of the time back in 1983 in your neck of the woods. What was going on? What was the issues that was driving this whole situation behind what you ended up being involved in?
Well, it was an economic situation similar to what we have in most of America today, except that back then it affected the farmland heavily, and now North Dakota's coming out pretty well in this recession and depression. But I'm sure once the rest of the country gets back up and running, we'll get our turn at it. But what happened was the Department of Agriculture, to some degree, was farming the farmers. They would give them just enough in loans. The Farmers Home Administration and there's another federal agency, I can't remember the name of it. But at any rate, they would bankroll the farmers just enough so they could go broke. And somebody had once said the Department of Agriculture was farming the farmers. They would put one, set one up and then come and reap it. Kind of a bad deal. But at any rate, we were having, the grain prices were low, costs were high, fuel had gone up substantially in the 70s,
right,
as you may recall.
Yes.
And fertilizer prices, a lot of things it took to keep the farm going had gone up, yet the prices were down. And like in the early 70s, when Nixon was president, grain, like wheat, went to like $7 a bushel. It had been like $2.50, and it went to $7. So a lot of these farmers went out and bought machinery and expanded their farm size, bought a bunch of land and this and that. And then I think it was 1 year later it dropped back down to $2.50. Well, that kind of set things up, and really the farmers that got involved in growth really had to struggle to stay, to make it. And as time went on and things got worse, cattle prices were down and one thing and another, and pretty soon people were being foreclosed. And the farm would be put up for sale by the bank, or if it was a federal loan, the Marshal Service would come in and they would advertise an auction, and there was everything that they could get their hands on would go on the auction block, including in some cases children's toys. The farm kids' toys got put up on the block.
That's incredible.
Well, it's incredible is right. Heartless is an understatement. But what the difference between that and a farm, between a farmer and somebody working in town is this: chances are that great-grandpa homesteaded, and then grandpa had the farm, and then he turned it over to dad, and then dad turns it over to the son, and due to conditions outside of the son's control, he loses the farm. Now, not only does he have the bank after him, and the auctioneer after him, and the government after him if it's a federal loan, and the kids after him because the toys went on the auction block, but the whole family's mad at the guy because grandpa homesteaded and he lost it. And that, it's about the most devastating thing anybody can have happen, because what you need if you're being foreclosed is support from your family and your friends and so on. And in these cases, the opposite was true in a lot of them, where and there was, as a result, there was suicides, murder-suicides, where the farmer would shoot the rest of the family and then kill himself.
God.
And although that wasn't widespread, if it happened once, it was way too often.
Was that publicized very much? Do you remember back then? Because I don't remember hearing a whole lot about that kind of thing. Maybe I just
not a lot. You would hear that there's been a murder-suicide in this community or that community, and it was farm-related stuff. But it wasn't like there was hundreds of them, but there was enough to where I'll tell you what, if it wouldn't have been for some counseling and some local church groups and stuff, there would have been a lot more of them.
Wow.
So there was the people in the area could see, hey, here's what's coming, and some of it was headed off at the pass by church groups and so on that were visiting with people and telling them, hey, this isn't the end of the world. We'll help you all we can, and we know it's not your fault and so on. So there was some caring people involved, but unfortunately, they weren't members of our government for the most part.
So what ended up, just to pull that story kind of full circle, what's going on up there these days? I mean, how did everybody come out of that?
Well,
generally,
the small farmers that were struggling are gone. The farms are probably dozed under because bigger operators that were able to buy up the land burned off the buildings and dozed the hole shut, and now it's a wheat field or whatever. So it used to be there was a farm, like every mile, a farm would be dotted. Back when I was a kid, in the late 50s, early 60s, there was farms all over the place. Now, the farms are so far away, each one has to have their own tomcat.
And are these basically guys who are doing more farming for the large industries?
No, not really. They're still family-type farmers, except that instead of having a section or two of land, they probably have 4 or 5 sections now, or they rent 2 to 3 extra sections so that they can afford to, so they can make it. The equipment's gotten so much bigger. The methods of farming have changed to such a degree that they can do so much more with so much less as far as equipment and time, that they've expanded their operations so that they can make it. And I think there's some success stories now, but having seen it in the 80s and then leaving the farming area for about 20 years and then coming back to it, a lot of changes, some positive, some not so positive. And what really bothers me is places I drive by, there used to be a great farm with wonderful people and good kids and hard-working family, and now it's part of a wheat field or a sunflower field because the buildings are dozed under and it's just gone.
What happened to the farmers that were foreclosed on, the ones that didn't kill themselves? Did they move out of the community?
Some of them went to work for other larger farmers, and others moved to communities where there was factory jobs, and some left the area. But one thing about it, you take these North Dakota country folks, whether they join the military or go to a big city, they're handed jobs because people know these folks know how to work. They know how to make it happen. And part of being from North Dakota is there's well, you know, you talk about Missouri, and we all know that, you know, stubborn as mules, but I'll tell you what, it's probably a hell of a lot worse up here because we have the 40 below weather and the snowbanks to put up with.
Oh, yes.
And anybody that can survive on a farm is strong-headed, or they'll never make it.
I've always wondered how anybody could stay up there for so long. That is, I was up there, but I wasn't in the blizzard, but I was in a building in a blizzard in Nebraska, and I was also spent a cold winter during the Christmas time with a friend of mine in a motel in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and it is no place to play around as far as weather.
Not at all. Not at all. And it is deadly.
Yes, deadly. It is.
Back when I was a kid, my buddies and I wouldn't even think of going anywhere on a nice day. We had to wait till there was a snowstorm because it was a challenge then. But now that I'm a little older and wiser, when weather bulletins come on that there's going to be a storm, I cancel my plans and stay home where I belong.
Well, plus you were in the
comes with age.
Yeah, plus you were with the ambulance service and the rescue service and all that stuff. So you had a lot of emergency training, and you became very acutely aware of how deadly this is and how you have to deal with it when you're helping people.
Oh, absolutely. And as soon as, if we had a bad storm in our area, as soon as the storm let up to where we could get a four-wheel drive rescue truck on the interstate, we'd go out and search for stranded people that had been going down the road and their engines died out as a result of the cold weather or hitting snowbanks. And one evening we found a whole bunch of people holed up in a rest area. Their cars had quit, and they were bundled up in the 50-degree rest area, and they thought it was like summer compared to outside. So, you know, there was a lot of missions to help people that, especially those that weren't from the area, that didn't understand what they were getting into.
Okay, well, that sounds like not only a harsh environment physically, but it certainly was a harsh environment economically for the people of that community, obviously, at that time, and yeah, it hasn't stopped. I mean, it's still going on today, and we know that we need the farmers. Really, one of the most important occupations there is on the planet is a farmer, because they give us the food we eat. We don't get it from the store. We get it from a farmer who's dedicated, and as you mentioned, has a very hard work ethic, and they're out there in all climes doing the job that needs to be done, not only for them but for the whole planet.
That's exactly right. And rain, flood, hail, snow, it doesn't make any difference. They're out there, and they're making it happen. That's
a hard occupation. So we got these guys getting squeezed at this time back in 1983, 1982, and previously, just short before all this happened. And so now, what are these farmers doing now? Are they getting Are they getting together? Are they having town meetings? They talking to the coffee houses? How did that go on? Because I think you mentioned in your book that you would go to some of these meetings as an individual just because you were born and raised in the community, and you sold to these farmers. Your family did, you mentioned, and so you are definitely involved in what's happening. So let's go ahead and talk about how these farmers were handling this amongst themselves of these foreclosure issues and hard economic times.
Well, it's kind of like anything else. If something happens to you and you're the only person that thinks this has happened to, it's very tough to make it through. But when you see that other people around you are having the same problems, and you get together and visit about it, you might not come up with a solution that saves the day, but just that moral support of being with other people and understanding how, why, and the results of these things, it kind of smoothens things out to some degree, or at least, when you know you're not the only one, it helps. Well, our local doctor was a staunch Christian, and he had been watching a lot of things that were happening within our federal government for years, and he had a lot of insight as to what was going on. I remember he had get us out of the UN signs way back. When I was a kid and didn't really understand what the UN was about, and now that I understand what it's about, I see why he had his signs up, and I wish it would have happened. Get us out of the UN is long overdue. At any rate, this doctor had a lot of people coming into him, a lot of the farmers coming into him for depression, anxiety, the things that would go along with being foreclosed. So he decided that maybe what needs to happen is a group, I don't know if I'm going to call it group meetings or group therapy, but the end result was the same. What he wanted to do was get these people together so they could discuss what's going on, collectively write a letter to our congressman. North Dakota only has one congressman, and the goal was to write a letter to our congressman and say, hey, look, we're in this kind of trouble. The federal government isn't the solution. The federal government's the problem. And he had quite a following from throughout North Dakota. There was people from several counties away that would come to the meetings and share their stories. And it was really, I'm going to call it therapy, I guess. It was really therapeutic for the people that attended. I didn't understand at the age of 26 and 7 back then. I didn't understand what was going on. That farmers that we'd serviced for years all of a sudden were being foreclosed. Farmers Home Administration was closing them down, and in fact, one case I can remember, this farmer needed fuel, and he was a little bit shaky to begin with, but we'd shut him off because the guy wouldn't pay the bill. And Farmers Home Administration called us and says, you go ahead and take that guy fuel, we're going to guarantee it. Well, we took the guy fuel, and the next thing we knew, he was shutting down, and this local county, the county manager of Farmers Home Administration said, well, I'm glad you took him to fuel, and we tried, but it didn't make it, and you're out. So his word was worthless. This is the kind of stuff they pull, and we the people sit back and take it.
Yeah, it hasn't changed much.
No, it hasn't. Well, in the mix of all this, there was a man named Gordon Kahl that I had never heard of prior to the fall of '82. And I didn't know much about Gordon Kahl at the time. I know a lot about him now. But Gordon, in the 1970s, had lived in the Midland, Odessa, Texas area, and he refused to pay income tax. And although this picture was painted by the news media and the government as a tax protester, this guy had a lot more than tax protest in his mind when it came to our government. He was actually showing people and teaching people some of the things that government was doing to create the havoc we were in. And although Reagan was our president back then, there was still a lot of things going on that were just absurd. And Reagan couldn't get the stuff straightened out, and it would have taken basically an overthrow of our government to get the stuff straightened out, and the stuff is still the way it was then. Agencies that exist that create rules that we didn't elect the people there. We can't recall the people that are there, yet we have to swallow their regulations, and it's just about unbearable, depending on what business you're in.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, at any rate, Gordon came back from World War II as a war hero, and when he stepped off the plane, he said he knew something was wrong, something had changed, and he wasn't quite sure what it was. There was welfare programs in place. There was farm programs in place, and there was just things that didn't feel right to him. It's like he came back from World War II, and things in our country had changed. Socialism was creeping into the system, according to Gordon. Well, one of the things that he was absolutely against was abortion, and he could not see his tax dollars being used to fund abortions. So he quit paying taxes. And they left him alone because he wasn't a very wealthy man and didn't make a lot. And they just left him alone because he wasn't, he wasn't much of a thorn in their side. But while he lived in Texas and worked on the oil wells, he decided to get on TV and tell other people how they don't have to pay their taxes and so on. That did not go over well.
I don't think it would go over too well.
No, that really put... he wound up going to Leavenworth, Kansas for, I believe it was 9 months.
Over the tax issue?
Over the tax issue, that's right. Now, another guy that was with him was named William Reinhardt. William and Gordon both wound up in federal prisons. Reinhardt went to Stafford, Arizona, and Gordon went to Leavenworth. Neither had a history of heart disease. Both suffered heart attacks while they were in prison. Gordon pulled through, but Reinhardt died. Gordon was convinced that while in there, being the thorn in the government side that him and Reinhardt were, he was convinced the government tried to kill him. Now, it doesn't make any difference if I believe that or not. What's important is that Gordon believed it.
You're right.
That's what's important. It's all in what's going through the mind of the beholder.
Yes.
And I listened to Gordon carefully, and I respected the man. I respected his heroism in the war. He got like 2 Bronze Stars and I think 2 or 3 Purple Hearts. I mean, the guy was highly decorated. He'd done a lot. He had done a lot for the country, but he was so agitated with the things that were happening in government. When he got a chance to come to these meetings at Medina and let people know what he thought, he was really stirring the stew. What we did not know, our little department did not know, there was a warrant out for him. And even if we would have, it probably wouldn't have made any difference.
Now, was this a federal warrant?
Federal warrant.
And what was it for? Do you know?
First thing today about a federal warrant. I don't know who needs this, a state warrant or a city warrant.
Right.
We know how to handle them. But quite frankly, the only time I'd ever met a U.S. Marshal before the 13th of February of 83 was at the Peace Officers Convention in August of 82. I met a couple of younger ones that we hung around together and got along, but I knew they were U.S. Marshals, but I didn't have a clue what their job was.
I think that's pretty much the same thing.
They weren't a real, everybody knew what the FBI and the Secret Service do,
right.
But Marshals didn't know and didn't really care.
Right.
So, at any rate, Gordon is wanted, and this an all-points bulletin gets set up by a U.S. Marshal, and this guy was a little different animal, to say the least.
Now, who is this?
He created a situation by claiming that Gordon and his friends were traveling in a certain vehicle with a certain license number from a certain place to another place, and that they had high-powered rifles with them, and the story goes on and on.
Right.
And this was a total lie. This was an all-points bulletin that went out to the entire state of North Dakota. Gordon was the kind of guy that would go grocery shopping. He would be in the drugstore or the gas station or wherever he needed to go, just like any other farmer, and could have been approached about any time. 5'6", 160-pound guy. It wasn't like he was a big gorilla or anything.
Right.
And rather than trying to take him gently and bring him to justice, if that's what we can call it, somebody someplace had this wild idea that it's time to go out and get this loudmouth that's stirring up a bunch of trouble in North Dakota, and on and on. So the Marshal Service decided it was time to set up. They wanted to find out where he was and just go after him, and with little or no forethought as to the danger that lurked. Now, Gordon, since he thought that he had a government-inflicted heart attack while in prison, he said, "I'll never go back. I'll never go back to prison, because if they get me there, they'll finish what they started."
So he was afraid they were going to kill him in prison.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's understandable.
Well, yes, and like I say, I can't tell you whether I believed him or not, but what was important is he believed it.
Yes, he believed it. That's right. That's his reality.
Absolutely. To him, it was reality. And after seeing things that I saw since then, I don't know. I would have hated to have been in his position.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. There's so much more. Many more shows about all those kinds of things that the federal government has done to people, all the way up, as a matter of fact, on our front page, on the recommended thing we have, if you scroll down a little bit, we got a video there from the Real News Network where they're talking to a former British ambassador or British minister, foreign minister, who had firsthand knowledge about how the CIA was involved and giving their okay and thumbs up to torturing in Uzbekistan, and it's incredible. I mean, granted, those are not American citizens, but we've heard stories about American citizens going the wrong way of the federal government and having bad things done to them physically.
Well, and the thing is, growing up as a youngster in a small community, we had CNN back then, and we had NBC and CBS and all that, but Heck, I was a Boy Scout, you know, and you just were raised to be honest, truthful, upfront, do what's good and right and honest, and we expected, as small townish as we are, we expected that our government was upfront and honest. And
well, yeah, you trust the government. You know, it's America. We're the good guys. Reagan's there. I mean, we were the shining light on the hill again. And
that's right.
That's how I remember that clearly too. That's how we felt. We wrapped ourselves around the flag, as they say, and Reagan was the guy, and he was going to make America great. And he was always telling us these inspiring stories about how great we were, trying to get us up. And like you said, when you're in a small town, especially at your age, and like I said, I'm your age, and I remember back then, my thoughts were on other things. And you were a police officer, so you were involved in some political aspects of your community, even though it was small. You're still involved in something. But as you mentioned, you're still thinking, we trust the government. What's the beef? You're a person with common sense or good sense, and you think clearly, and you're, like you said, you're honest, and you're a police officer for all the right reasons. And you figured, well, the federal government's going to be like me. And,
sure, exactly.
And you found out different.
Oh, did I find out different?
So Gordon Kahl, now, what did the federal government, if you know, we heard what you knew about Gordon Kahl, but what did the federal government think about Gordon Kahl? Were they spreading innuendo about him at the time, or maybe you didn't know about it at the time, or were there some people feeding the federal government some information that was inaccurate, that was trying to fan the flames to create an incident?
Well, I believe that there was some informants, people that had been working with the government, not from our community, but had been working with the government on some other issues. I believe they were sort of brought into this thing to see what they could do to tip off the federal government as far as where Gordon was hanging out, who he was with, what he was saying, and it turns out that they came up. He forgot what it was like in prison, I think, because they wanted him to sign a form that had to do with his probation. He got out and he was on probation, and he refused to sign a certain form, and as a result, he wound up with a probation violation, which was a misdemeanor,
yeah,
and was almost nothing. Well, there had been a U.S. Marshal in under the Carter administration named Bud Warren. And Bud Warren would go visit with Gordon, and they would wind up having dinner together. Gordon's wife is an excellent cook and would cook up a bunch of homegrown products and so on, and then they would go in and have just a great meal and a discussion. And although they would leave, they would depart friends, but had a very difference of opinion of how things need to be handled in this case. The U.S. Marshal would indicate that sooner or later, Gordon, you know, somebody's going to come out here and they're not going to be friendly like I am, and this stuff would go back and forth. And Gordon said, you guys leave me alone and I'll leave you alone, but you come after me and I'm going to take two of you along. And he meant business. He said there's going to be World War III right out in this yard.
So now go ahead. Did Gordon, Gordon didn't go around threatening people or anything in the community. Did he go around making threats to the government in public to people, where it was making people uncomfortable to have him around, or do you know of any of that?
No, I don't know that anybody was uncomfortable to have him around. He had his own things to say about government, and most people didn't believe it because they were small townish like I was,
mm-hmm.
and thought that the government was fair and honest and upfront. And how could they so mistreat one person? Well, he was very staunch in what he believed. He had lived it. He would explain it to people. Sometimes people would get into discussions with him, and one of them that I had, you know, being on a volunteer fire department, I said, well, Gordon, if you're against taxes, how would we fund our fire department to have the equipment and apparatus we need to go out to fires? He says, oh, I'm not against that. I'm not against road taxes or school taxes or taxes for local fire departments and so on. He says, income tax is where I have a problem because, first of all, it's the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, and second, abortions are funded by our government with money they collect an income tax.
And that's not an unusual a slant that a lot of people take to this day. A lot of people feel that way too, and and they're not being pulled into prison or getting warrants served or being chased around and being called some kind of extremist.
Oh, absolutely. And he carried a Mini 14 with him, a Ruger Mini 14 with a 30-round clip, and he let people know he is not going back to prison. He's going to tell people what he knows like it is, and he's not going to start anything, but he'll certainly be there to finish it if somebody wants to start something.
Okay, now you mentioned... Go ahead, finish your plot.
As a local peace officer, I felt no threat whatsoever, because this guy, if you'd been parked along the road with car trouble, he'd have been the first guy to stop and help you. Or if somebody would have been assaulting or robbing you, and he had have stopped, that would have came to a focus instantly. He wasn't the kind of guy to put up with any of the stuff that's going on in America nowadays, the gang warfare and so on.
Oh, yeah.
Not old Gordon. He wouldn't have put up with none of that stuff. But as far as him out threatening people and so on, didn't happen.
Now,
did not happen.
Now, you said he carried this gun around. Now, what was the gun laws in North Dakota at the time?
Well, concealed weapons were unlawful unless there was a permit. But openly, weapons could be carried and can be carried.
Okay.
You can have one in your car without a case. In our state, you just can't have a round in the chamber. You can have the magazine fully loaded, but you just can't have one in the chamber. And that's, well, you know, we're part of the wild, wild west. And
yeah.
Out here, if you need a sheriff, it might be 45 minutes till he gets to your place. And if there's a snowstorm, it might be 2 days to get till he gets to your place.
Well, I'm sure if Gordon was around, he'd be working on the Second Amendment rights, because, you know, it says shall not be infringed, and that means there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And unfortunately, the federal government has encroached as much as possible in local communities and states to take the freedom away to have the right to bear arms, which shall not be infringed, but they're finding all kinds of ways to do that too. But it depends on what side of the spectrum you're on. If you're on the federal government side, they'll have some legalese way of telling you that to not be infringed has some mystic meaning to it. I have a general education. I pretty much know what that means. I don't think I have to have it explained.
Right. And being a peace officer back then, I was a hunter long before I was a peace officer, and actually, you know, there was people that asked me, hey, the guy was carrying a gun to these meetings. Why didn't you do something about it? And the answer is this: he wasn't hurting anybody.
And it was
at that
legal.
time, I didn't know he had been in prison. You know, I didn't know he had been in prison and there was a warrant out for him.
Right.
But I just knew wherever this guy goes, he carries a rod with him,
and it was legal.
As long as he's not hurting anybody or threatening anybody, I got no problem with that.
Okay,
In fact, I'm a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment, and it would be against my grain to go start asking questions that aren't any of my business.
And isn't it also in the oath that don't you take an oath to support the Constitution? Right. So
yep.
That's something that's really muddled these days, and you know that. And Gordon would certainly be on that fight too if he were around today. So and the reason why I brought that up is because you hear so often people talked about military terms like the Weavers and Waco. Their house is a compound, and they talk about the weapons cache that they have, no matter whether it's legal for them to have it or not. They want to make it sound like if you got guns, you're a bad guy and you're an outlaw, and you live in this compound because you live away from yourself, or from the community rather, by yourself. And they're always making it sound like by saying these things, they want to touch something in the public's mind to make them appear to be some kind of wild cannon out there ready to shoot anybody and anything that moves or that comes close to their house or their compound. And it's the same thing in every case. And I thought it was important to hear what the laws were, to show that Gordon was law-abiding. He wasn't violating the laws. He didn't have a violent demeanor. He was not out there instigating problems and starting fights with people. He wasn't a loner, because you said he was involved in the community. Hell, he went on TV to talk about taxes, so he's not hiding from anybody. Now, there was a group called Posse Comitatus, which actually is in the Constitution to give assistance to law enforcement. Now, what was Posse Comitatus, as you understand it, the group, the small group of individuals back when Gordon was around?
Well, Gordon had been a member of the Posse when he was in Texas, but he had a disagreement with some of their theories or beliefs, so he actually backed out of it or quit it, and he was not promoting them whatsoever. He had some beliefs that are probably coming true today. It has to do with the power needs to come from the people and go up, not from the federal government and come down. And you'll hear that on Lou Dobbs and other places where stuff Gordon Kahl said 26 years ago, you'll now start hearing. In fact, as I recall, the TV pastor Jack Van Impe, I think, had a presentation on New World Order and One World Government and so on. And that tied in with what Gordon was talking about back then. And people would write, some of the people would write Gordon off as a kook because they believed in our government, they believed in the honesty that wasn't there, et cetera, et cetera. And Gordon was trying to teach, and a lot of people weren't listening. I listened, and that doesn't mean back then I believed what he said, but as time has gone on and I've paid attention to what's happening, a lot of stuff he said has come true.
It certainly has, and we could certainly make a 5-hour show just of list of things that have happened in that regard since Gordon Kahl's time.
And with regard to the posse, I kind of looked at it like this. When this shootout happened, a day or so later, there was people from the posse in Wisconsin and other places that were coming out of the woodwork, just like back then when a bomb would go off in a foreign airport, there was always somebody standing up and taking responsibility or credit for it.
Right.
And that's kind of what I saw here. There was a guy named James Wickstrom from Tigerton Dells, Wisconsin, and all of a sudden he was on TV being interviewed, and we're going to come and get more of them cops, they find somebody, get them on TV, attach them to whoever it was the problem was with, and try to paint everybody with the same brush. And it works. It works. The government and the news media have a way of doing this to where if I'm a Catholic and Al Capone's a Catholic, there's something wrong with both of us.
Well, that's true. We've had recently the MEAC report here in Missouri where they were talking, and there's also a flyer that came out in the FBI office in Florida. And they always say, we never knew about it. The higher-ups say that. And it was talking about people who quote the Constitution, who are Christians. Lately, if you like Ron Paul or Chuck Baldwin, the Libertarian, or third-party candidates, something's wrong with these guys. These guys could be homegrown terrorists, and they talk about the militia, and they make the word militia sound bad. And like you said, they've been doing this now really well for about the last 10 or 20 years. And if you don't follow it, you think... you're just making this stuff up. You're just kind of overblowing things, and it's just all hyperbole. But if you look into it, as you have and as I have and as Gordon has, and you're honest and open about what you're seeing, and you compare this to what this is supposed to be, and you see a very strange picture emerging. And so it's very strange, or well, maybe it isn't strange since he was in the military, and he grew up thinking close to the ground and close to his heart and his pocketbook. He knew when somebody was encroaching on his freedoms, and he could feel that. And I think that's the sensibilities that he was talking about, maybe that you mentioned when he got off the plane. He knew something was different. It's just something intuitive that he had in his heart that he could see. And sometimes you call them a psychic or a mystic or a prognosticator, but just because Gordon didn't call himself that doesn't mean he didn't possess those abilities.
Well, that's right. And let's take a look at what's gone on since. Let's take a look at the definition of terrorist, and I don't have it right before me at this point. It's on my bookshelf not far from here. But back in 2004, late October, early November of 2004, in fact, it was right when President George W. Bush was elected for the second time. I happened to be at a firefighting school in the Elko, Nevada area, and part of the class had to do with fighting oil-type fires that are set off by terrorists, and they were talking about like the Earth Liberation Front and the PETA people and on like that. Well, At any rate, they gave us a handout. And in this handout, according to the FBI, the first right-wing terrorist attack on the United States was in 1983 at Medina, North Dakota. And I about come unhooked. Are
you serious? They actually said that in that pamphlet?
Absolutely. I got the pamphlet on my bookshelf. Absolutely.
Oh, my goodness.
Then let's go a step further. When you read their definition of terrorist or terrorism, and you look at the Ruby Ridge case, what the Weaver family went through, the government was the terrorist in the Ruby Ridge case, according to their own definition.
Well, that's true. One of the definitions, to paraphrase it, they say now is somebody who uses the threat of force or something to gain political ends. Well, isn't that what the CIA's been doing for 50 years? Going in to use black budget money and to overthrow a government and install a puppet regime? That's terrorism. We have no business being there. And now we do it to our own people, and as you know, they're really going for the lone wolf terrorist, and they're going for the individuals like the Unabomber. And here you're talking about Gordon Kahl as a homegrown terrorist, a domestic terrorist. He'd be the lone wolf guy these days.
That's right. He'd be the lone wolf guy. And what they've done since, think back to the mid '90s when the militia movement was moving heavily.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, Oklahoma City happens, and Tim McVeigh gets painted with the same brush as the militia members, and all of a sudden, militias people are dropping off like flies.
Absolutely.
My message to the Tea Party people is this: it's going to happen again. Some kook is going to surface at a Tea Party and either blow up, set off a bomb, or blow up a building, or shoot people, and then it's time for the mainstream media to start saying, okay, look, all these Tea Party people are wacko, and they're going to try that to stop the movement. And my answer is this: if that happens, when that happens, it's not if, it's when. That's been the old way of controlling movements. When this happens, don't quit. Go out and recruit 10 more. That's my message to America, is get out there and recruit 10 more people to come to the next one.
And it's terrible that we have to feel this way, but what has happened in our history, we have seen, and these are all very well documented. These are nothing off-the-cuff remarks that you're making or I have made. These are documented, and like you mentioned, you have the document in your possession. You were at the meeting when they said this gentleman we've been talking about who has a beef with how his taxes are paid, and he's a hurting farmer and so forth. And they've made him out to be a terrorist and called it a terrorist event. And what did you say, the first domestic terrorist event on U.S. soil was that one?
The first right-wing.
Right-wing,
The first right-wing terrorist event was 1983, Medina, North Dakota.
I guess there's no such thing as a left-wing terrorist, is there? I guess that'd be the Animal Liberation Front and the environmentalists.
Yeah. I think, if I recall, I think like back in the 70s, Patricia Hearst and that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might have been left wing. I haven't looked at this page for some time, but I think that was on the left wing side.
Yeah. That's and they also create terror networks. The governments do, and there's I've got a tape of an MI5 guy who talked about how they played off the Irish people, the Catholics, against the Protestants, and he couldn't stand doing it anymore, and he had to come clean, and he gave a National Press Club briefing on it. And, people just couldn't believe that this guy was telling the truth. And they said, well, how did you do it? He goes, well, I can't stand it. I'm sick to my stomach. He was physically ill over this stuff, as you became, too, and we'll get to that. So,
absolutely.
So Gordon Kahl gets painted with a broad stroke, and we see that he's actually not that kind of guy. He's a helpful person. He's a thoughtful person, a loving husband, a great neighbor, carries a gun that's legal. He says things that make some people uncomfortable because he's out there out front and he feels it, and a lot of the other people are kind of just set in their ways about what they believe about America. And this is we have this today, and so this is the stage that we have set. And you got this. Then we got this warrant, this federal warrant for a misdemeanor charge, not for some violent criminal activity that he was involved in. Although later they said that, as you mentioned. But he's got this misdemeanor charge, very small, minor situation. And as you said, this guy was out in the community, just like David Koresh, where you could go to him at the store and accost him and slap the cuffs on him or whatever it is they wanted to do. Would have been easy as heck. And but they didn't do that for some reason. And as you mentioned, there might have been some people feeding the federal government some information. But nevertheless, this is the environment now that's being created, that's being fanned to whip up the flames against Gordon in the mind of the United States government. And here you are in a small community in North Dakota, small town, like you said, about 500 people, small police force. Everybody's minding their own business, thinking the world's an okay place. And then how does this transpire? What goes on then? How do they start going after Gordon Kahl to make this big domestic terrorist incident occur?
Well, back then they didn't call it a terrorist event. It's after 9/11 is when all of a sudden the word terrorism started really hitting, and that's when they labeled this one a terrorism event.
Okay,
but back then it was an arrest attempt. And what it amounted to was Keystone Cops, probably. Here's kind of how this thing went. Gordon had was involved at another meeting at the local clinic with the doctor and a bunch of these stressed out farmers, and there'd been this all-points bulletin out for him. And I met with the chief deputy sheriff of the county the evening before, and our local deputy sheriff who lived in Medina. And I said, look, Kahl's been around. There's an all-points bulletin out for him. I don't want nothing to do with any attempt for this guy. He is armed. He's not out robbing banks, or I'd be the first one out trying to get him myself. But this guy he's got a problem with the government, and it's a paperwork problem, and I cannot see any reason for bloodshed over a paperwork deal or a tax deal.
Now, why did you say bloodshed? Did you really feel that there was going to be bloodshed for some reason?
Oh yes. At that time, I knew Gordon meant business. He was a typical North Dakota farmer, and he, when he said something, he meant it. And I'll tell you how, growing up in a small community, here's how you observe people, and there's some people that are big bluffs, and some people, if they say that calf is going in that barn right now, I don't care if there's a tornado coming. That calf is going in that barn right now. And that's the kind of guy Gordon was. If he said, this is going to happen, and here's when and here's how, I would go to the bank with it. I wouldn't aggravate this guy.
And this is because he had a fear that if they would arrest him and get him into custody, they were going to kill him.
That's exactly right.
Right. Now, Ruby, I understand, too. Ruby, the one who was implementing killing Oswald, many people believe, and I think he believed, that the government gave him the cancer that eventually killed him. I think that was the prevailing theory.
No, I've heard that theory before, and
so it's not unusual, is what I'm trying to bring out, is that other people feel that.
Well, and then afterwards, when it came time for me to testify, I don't know if you've ever been involved in a court case where there's an attorney.
Well, I was in a federal court, and I was the defendant.
It
was a minor thing.
You defended yourself, but I don't know if you've ever been in a case where you get a chance to visit with the prosecutor as a witness. And I did, and the prosecutor goes through my testimony, and just to kind of give a heads up of what they're going to ask so I can respond in an intelligent manner, because there's a lot of stress there and all.
Oh, yeah.
And they wanted to know what my answers were to certain questions, and they pretty much had everything from the FBI. And the guy gets all done, and he says, have you got any questions? I said, yeah. What about Gordon's heart attacks? Yeah, from in prison. And he says, keep your mouth shut about Gordon's heart attacks. So that's...
Oh, really? What'd you think about that?
That's all I needed to hear.
You thought that
I was scared stupid, as that one movie's called, Scared Stupid.
Do you think Okay, so you mean that you think that when you brought that up, you broached that question, that he was actually concurring with Gordon's beliefs, that the government maybe brought those on?
One of two things happened. Either he knew that it was true, or he knew that would muddy the water to a great degree.
Yeah.
If that would come up.
Yeah, it could be looked at another way. Yeah, it could be looked at the other way, where when we bring out the fact that he feels that way, even though it didn't happen, people will think that. So it could go either way. We don't know, right? We don't know.
But I took it at the time as though he knew that it happened.
That was your gut feeling.
Yes, it was.
Well, let's go with our guts, because usually they're right.
Well, I like I said earlier, I didn't know whether to believe Gordon or not, or I'm not going to tell you that I believed Gordon when he said that while he was in prison he suffered a heart attack or whatever the case was. However, I mentioned it previously, but this certainly got me thinking. Okay,
so now you're telling your folks on your end about what you think should be done, which is basically, we want to stay out of it. We think that you guys on the U.S. Federal Marshal side should find a different way to do this, and you're doing everything in your power to get them to de-escalate where they're heading. You feel they're escalating into a situation where there's going to be bloodshed because you know Gordon's demeanor, and you're getting a feeling, it sounds like, that these federal marshals are not following good standard police procedure. Is that right?
Well, that's right, because I heard the all-points bulletin, and it sounded a little shaky to me to begin with. It sounded a little bogus. Turns out it was very bogus. In fact, it was 100% bogus. At any rate, let me back up just a little bit here. When I met with the chief deputy sheriff of the county and our local deputy at 4 a.m., February 13th, which was about 14 hours prior to the shooting, I told them what I believed was going to happen if anybody tries to arrest this guy, if the federal government tries to arrest this guy. Their all-points bulletin says, whatever you do, if you see him, don't try to apprehend him, call the marshal service. Well, all that was an invite for some, especially some young officer that's trying to climb the ladder of success. That was just an invite to go out and arrest this guy.
Kind of like,
whenever they say don't do it, I mean, hey, that just puts the frosting on the cake for somebody to go out there and be the hero.
Well, at any rate,
so 2 or 3 in the following afternoon roll along, and the local deputy sheriff, who he read this case different than I did. He didn't read Gordon as the kind of a guy that was not going to go to jail. He didn't read Gordon as the kind of a guy that's like an ornery North Dakota farmer who's going to put that calf in the barn no matter what. He read Gordon as more of a bluffer. Well, so he calls his chief deputy sheriff, the guy that we had the conversation with at 4 in the morning, and says, hey, Gordon Kahl's in town. Let's go arrest him. And the chief deputy sheriff says, wait a minute, you heard what Graf said at 4 this morning? To hell with it. It's a federal case. We don't want nothing to do with it. And my concern was not only the bloodshed, but if something happens in our little community, we're having a heck of a struggle the way it is with the farms being foreclosed in the area. When the farms go away, so does Main Street in the little farming community. And we didn't need anything wrecking our little community. We were trying to hang on to what we had, and I could see nothing good coming out of this thing whatsoever. I could see nothing but people from outside our area coming in, stirring the stew, messing everything up and leaving, and let us pick up the pieces. And I didn't want anything to do with getting involved in a gun battle with a farmer. Not only that I might have lost the gun battle, but can you imagine living around a bunch of other farmers if you go out and stir one of these things up?
Yeah, what are they going to think about you?
I wasn't raised that way to go out and get a gunfight started with some guy that has a paperwork problem.
No,
not my way of doing things then, and not my way of doing things
pretty
now.
Much you go out there and talk to him, right?
Absolutely. I could talk to that guy anytime I wanted to, and I'm not going to tell you I would have arrested him. I'm not going to come out with that, because I think the opposite is true. I'd visit with him for days if that's what it took, but if somebody says go arrest that guy, I'd quit before I would go arrest him, because I'm not going to put myself in that position.
So
and that doesn't. If he'd have been robbing banks, I'd have been the first one out there to arrest him.
No,
so it's not a matter of courage. It's a matter of what's a guy willing to do over a paperwork problem.
Right. And in the end, you kind of find that out, right?
Oh, I found out when people come in and totally messed up things and then left me blamed for the events that took place, when in actuality I was the guy that tried to keep the soda and acid apart. I did everything in my power to keep the two factions from getting together, and it just didn't work.
Now, in your book, you've got this written that you've got some documents, and I think Gordon Kahl's son ended up finding some autopsy reports that leads to the conclusion that things were not as they appeared. And didn't you say about this all-points bulletin that it was bogus in what regard?
Well, there was an all-points bulletin that talked about Gordon and his friends heading to disrupt a sale at Minot, North Dakota, and they were seen leaving a gas station someplace. And it's been a while since I read the specific report, but it was just the emphasis that was put on this thing didn't sound like the kind of a thing Gordon Kahl would be doing. Rounding up his buddies and loading up the rifles and filling up the station wagon so they could go shoot the sheriff or whatever. It was just a real. It struck me as this thing is not right. Whoever came up with this is doped up or something, because it just didn't sound like the Gordon that I knew.
All right, so this APB bulletin was the beginning. It was kind of the kindling that started this whole thing, then, right?
Well, that's right. I want to go back a little bit on that again too. This story's got so many tentacles to it. It's a very tough story to tell, and it took us like 2 years to write that book because of all the different, very, very difficult story to tell or write. But I also want to mention that there was the chief probation officer for the District of North Dakota. A lot of states have several federal judicial districts in them, but North Dakota has the whole judicial district, covers the whole state. So we had the chief probation officer for the the federal government within the state of North Dakota. He would go out and also visit with Gordon, and he had the same rapport as the U.S. Marshal under the Carter administration. And he would go in and have dinner with the people and just actually enjoyed being around them. Even though they had a difference of opinion of how things need to be handled or what's going on within the United States government, they got along. Well, at one point or another, the district changed, and the town of Heaton, where Gordon was farming near or lived near, wound up in the Bismarck district rather than the Fargo district where the chief probation officer lived. So a new probation officer named Holloway, as I recall, he was going to go out and visit with Gordon and try to get the papers signed, and some people in the federal building, and I can't recall who it was, had fired him up about, oh, this guy's bad, he'll kill you, he's nuts, just on and on about this dangerous Gordon Kahl.
And this is all about the probation papers that Gordon didn't go back to sign. That's what this is all about, right?
That's right.
Not about tax evasion or foreclosing on property or gun ownership, or it was just simply about he didn't sign these probation papers.
That's right. He didn't sign the papers, so it was a probation violation. Earlier, they had claimed he didn't pay his taxes, and that's why part of his probation was that he had to pay taxes. But the truth is, he didn't make enough money to where he had to file taxes, so that was a moot point.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It turned. Yeah, it really boils down to he wouldn't sign this paper indicating that he had a meeting with the federal probation officer, or I don't know exactly what was on it, but it kind of boils down to that. So at any rate, Gordon's being Gordon, and this new probation officer is very concerned because he's heard all these horror stories about this wicked Gordon Kahl. So I think he went out and met with him, and the meeting was not very good. So he comes back and says Gordon's refusing to obey his probation, so we need to round him up. And that's kind of how things start steamrolling, and once the steamroller starts going, it's pretty tough. Once there's momentum, it's pretty tough to stop it.
You're right.
And now I want to jump ahead a little bit to the Ruby Ridge case. As that was going on.
Now, when was the Ruby Ridge case? Do you recall?
Ruby Ridge was, I believe, in '91 or '2. It was quite a few years later than this, but some of the same tactics take place.
Now, Ruby Ridge, for those who don't know, was about a fellow named Randy Weaver and his family that lived, they said, in his compound, which actually was his house up in the hills. And he did have some run-ins with the law, but once again, the main crux of the issue that I think you're bringing out, correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that the way they tried to handle arresting these guys and getting them to work with the government, to come to their terms, to meet them, and because they didn't want to come down and do this or do that, the government wanted to, it just once again, it escalated because these
well,
guys.
It escalated, but I have a little different analogy here. That if you take a good look at this case, and then you take a good look at how responding agents, whether it's local police, whether it's federal agents, whatever. Here's the situation: when this probation officer comes back and said, "Hey, this guy, he's dangerous. He carries a gun. He's not going to sign." Then the word starts getting out. Oh my God! And this escalates to where Al Capone's back or John Dillinger's back. It's almost that bad.
Oh boy!
And what I want to jump forward to about 8-9 years is the Ruby Ridge case. When I watched the Senate investigation on the Ruby Ridge case, I can just see what's happening here. When the hostage rescue team of the FBI was flying out to Idaho for the Ruby Ridge case, they were being pumped up about this bandit, Randy Weaver, who had been, I can't remember exactly what all they had, trying to shove down his throat. Oh, this guy's building bombs, and he's got machine guns, and on and on and on. And what they do is they psych these cops up so that when they do arrive on the scene, they're ready for a battle.
Right. Well, they do that in the military, too. They get them all up and ready, and they get the weird music going these days in the tanks. You can see them on YouTube where they have these really terrible metallic, kill, 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 and they're like, this mob mentality.
The mob mentality, exactly. And I don't think that when we pay our taxes to hire federal agents, unless it's somebody like John Dillinger who's out robbing banks or somebody like Osama bin Laden, I'm not sure that them tactics are needed on American citizens. I really don't think that American citizens need to be rounded up by a mob of people that are so proud of themselves because they're out there with a machine gun and have our taxpayer money in their pockets, and they're going to create a scene.
Right.
And I just have trouble with that.
Yeah, well, you're not alone these days. It's very prevalent. So these guys are, you feel these guys are getting like that. They're ramping them up. They're getting the adrenaline going. We got to get going on this APB. We got to get this guy arrested. And he's a loose cannon. He's a dangerous dude carrying a little machine gun. And you better look out, pal. So you better take some firepower with you.
Oh, absolutely. This deal was not going to go away friendly. And another issue that plays into this, the politics of the Federal Marshal's Office in Fargo. The ex-marshal, Bud Warren, who would go out and visit with Kahl and have a disagreement with him, but they would leave on friendly terms. And the current U.S. Marshal, a guy named Ken Muir, who died on February 13th, 83, at the hands of Gordon Kahl, they were absolute enemies within that office. So Marshal Muir says we're going to handle it our way, and previous marshal, who's now a deputy marshal, Bud Warren, says this is a Tinker Toy Mickey Mouse setup. If you think that this guy's that dumb that he's going to fall for you setting up a roadblock to catch him, you got your head someplace, and this goes back and forth, back and forth. These guys hated each other.
Well,
both federal employees, both worked out of the same office, but they absolutely hated each other.
But didn't they? Didn't it ever come up in some kind of? I mean, you might not be privy to this, obviously, because you were not in that office. But it seemed like you think these guys would have a little powwow and try to find a way to make it a little more for a misdemeanor, just signing a paper, no matter whether they take them in custody or not. That they would try to find a way to do it where they could just, like you said, see him on the street. Hey, Gordon, can we talk? Maybe pull him over to talk over, get by a truck, and then maybe put the cuffs on him. Of course, he's going to kick and scream like a mule, but what the hey? It's better than putting up a roadblock where you've got space between you, and with that space, you can stick a gun out, which is eventually what happened. And when you don't have that face-to-face and that close personal contact, it's easy to escalate a situation because you're not reading the other person. They don't they're not feeling what you're trying to do. Just like looking at your body movement, like a wrestler or somebody does. They watch each other. Their eyes are looking at their eyes, but they're seeing the whole movement of the body, what the other person might be ready to do. And it just seems like you said, putting up a roadblock was going to easily incite and escalate and cause this thing to get a little bit more out of control because you can't talk when you're talking over the barrel of a gun at 20 feet or however far apart they were. And at the same time, you have the job of protecting your community, and you've got these federal guys coming in, and what are they asking you to do at this time? I mean, okay, now they've made up their mind they're gonna do this roadblock thing, and they got this APB out, and so how do they know where Gordon's going and what they're going to do, and then what are you doing on your end when you find out about it?
Okay, I've been told 3 times by now, as these people headed to Medina to get Gordon, I've been told 3 times that I won't have to have anything to do with this.
Now, who told you that?
At 14 hours prior to the shooting, when I was meeting with the local deputy sheriff and the chief deputy sheriff of the county, they says, well, first of all, Graf, nothing's going to happen around Medina, and if something happens out of our control around Medina, you won't have to have anything to do with it. That was the first time, and then 2 more times I was told, don't worry, you're not going to have anything to do with this. Well, I could just see how this was escalating, and the first thing that I saw was this deputy sheriff. He just didn't look at it the same way I did, and that doesn't mean he's a bad person. He just didn't look at it with the depth that I did, knowing that Gordon was one of these kind of people that no means no. So he thought it was just going to be an easy take and that Gordon was bluffing, and he found out that I was right. Well, when this deputy sheriff rounded me up to borrow my portable radio, I had a handheld Motorola radio, and he says, I need to use your radio. I got the marshals coming to town. And I said, well, we talked about this. What's going on? Oh, it's not going to be a big deal. I got 2 of them are coming from Fargo and 2 from Bismarck. And Medina's 70 miles from Bismarck and about 110 miles from Fargo. So he had, he had the more machine moving at that point. And I was really concerned because of the meeting I'd had at 4 in the morning, saying, hey, look, we don't want any trouble around Medina. Yet this guy, he calls them in, and once the steamroller's going, it's tough to stop it. So I thought, well, the best thing I can do, knowing that this is not going to be a friendly situation, I'm going to round up ambulance and rescue personnel. At the time, I was the training officer of the fire department and rescue squad, and with the rank of captain, and I think I was the president of the ambulance service that year. So we had what's called a fire bar, where the phone would ring in 20 different houses at once, and I didn't use that because I didn't want anybody knowing what I was up to. So I called these members of the teams individually on their telephones, said, I got to meet you. I got to have you come and meet me at the fire station. I'll tell you what it's about when I get here. When you get here. So I went to the fire station, and here comes a few ambulance and rescue squad members, and I said, okay, nobody leaves the building, nobody calls out of here, this is airtight, but I suspect there's some federal agents in town to arrest a farmer that most of the people in Medina did not know or had heard of him, because he was from 50 miles away, which, in some areas that's a long distance. Here,
well,
there's
sure.
probably 4 towns between us, so it wasn't, it wasn't like he was totally unheard of, but most people didn't know him. At any rate, my right-hand man had just got back from a National Guard drill. His name's Steve Schnabel, and he came to the fire station himself, and it wasn't long before the marshals were calling my radio number, and I had been guaranteed 3 times I don't have to have anything to do with this case, and all of a sudden they're calling for it. So it was so unlike my character not to help somebody that was asking for help, and I think my service to the public in all the various fields probably speaks for itself, but probably the hardest thing that I ever did was not answer my radio call, and I said, no, I've been guaranteed I don't have nothing to do with this. I won't have to have anything to do with this, and I'm not going to have anything to do with this.
Yeah.
Well, Schnabel, my right-hand man, says, I'll answer them, see what they want. And he come back and says, yeah, they want directions, so I'll go give them directions. They were asking him some certain questions, and he goes up to them, and they put a shotgun in his hand. So now he's involved in this mess. They didn't give him a picture of Gordon Kahl. They didn't give him a description of Gordon Kahl. He didn't know about the other marshals that came in from the Bismarck area. He was with the ones that showed up from Fargo. He hadn't seen what the other guys looked like. He had a loaded shotgun in his hand and didn't know who he was supposed to shoot or when he was supposed to shoot him.
He didn't know anybody except the people that he was actually with there physically then, right?
That's right. That's
wow.
right. He
That's
had
scary.
no clue.
Scary.
It's very scary. It's like, where do you start with a mess like this? Well, then one of our ambulance squad personnel look out of the door of the fire station, and they see the railroad. They look down to the north, and there's railroad tracks, and right across the railroad tracks is a police car with this red light flashing, and I'm like, what is going on here? He says, hey, look at this. They're set up by the railroad tracks. So I look out the door, and sure enough, here's the federal marshal's vehicle and Schnabel's vehicle set up at the railroad tracks.
Now, how far was that from your town there where you were located?
The railroad tracks were in town, about a fourth of a block from a trailer court that's full of young families with small children.
Wow, no.
And the fire station is like 2.5 blocks from there. And I take a look at this, and I'm sure my jaw dropped, probably about down to my belt. I could not believe that these people are after this dangerous criminal Gordon Kahl, who always carries a high-powered rifle, and they got a roadblock set up right in the community. So I'm like, this is this ain't right. So I get on the radio and say, you need to get this roadblock moved out of town. And the guy that set up the phony all points bulletin, Carl Wigglesworth, one of the marshals, he gets back and says, well, there's no avenues of escape here, and on and on. And I'm like, wait a minute. There's all kinds of avenues of escape. Now, here's a guy who spent 10 minutes in our community talking to a guy who spent, ever since I was old enough to ride my bicycle to my grandpa and grandma's house on the other end of this little town. I knew that town like the back of my hand. And here's this guy that's been there 10 minutes telling me where the avenues of escape are. That didn't go over too big.
No.
So I basically said, you get this roadblock out of our town. There's a place you can go a mile north of the community. There's a vacant farm. If anything happens up there, nobody in town will get hurt. And I laid it out very plain and simple. There was no avenues of escape. There's lakes. They were frozen ponds at the time, but they were lakes on either side of the road. And if you really wanted to get him, no one would get hurt up there. So okay, we'll leave your town. And I have a big sigh of relief, knowing that at least the little children in the community won't be eating lead from stray bullets ricocheting here and there. And if you can believe this, the people of the community still hate me after getting this thing out of their community and saving, I think, the lives of little children that whenever they see police cars or fire trucks, the first thing they do is see how close they can get,
Right.
See what's going on. At any rate, they did leave. They went up to this vacant farm, and I expected them, since they had a follow-up car that was going to follow Kahl out of town. That happened to be the marshals from Bismarck and our local deputy sheriff who jumped in with them. I figured that when this follow-up car would follow Kahl's out of town, they would stop him about a mile out of town, and here's what I thought would happen. It would be like an FBI arrest. The marshals would get out on the road as Kahl was approaching. They would stop his car. There was no way the car could get by if the vehicles were on the road. And they would say, get out with your hands up. We got a warrant for you. And if Kahl got out with a gun in his hand, they'd shoot him.
That would be it, yeah.
Pure and simple. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how, however you want to slice it, I guess, it wasn't an FBI stop. It was Kahl and his folks crest a hill right close to Medina. And
now, let me stop you there. How did they know when Kahl was coming or from which direction he was coming from?
The follow-up car had radio contact with the marshals that were parked at the vacant farm.
Okay.
Okay, so as they're leaving Medina, heading north out of the community, there's a hill. As the Kahl vehicles got on top of the hill, instead of these marshals' vehicles being hidden behind the vacant farm buildings and then pull out in front of them as they got closer, they sat on the hill with the red lights flashing.
So he could see them.
Yes, he pressed this hill 0.8 of a mile away, and he goes, oh boy, there's people up there that want to stop us. Yeah. So they go to make a U-turn in a farmyard. That's the people at this farm just had a little baby, like I think weeks or a few months before this happened. and they're home minding their own business on a Sunday afternoon, getting close to dark, getting 5:30 in the afternoon, and here's the call people are trying to turn around and get the hell out of there, not knowing there was a marshal's vehicle following them.
Now, how many cars? Wasn't there more than one car with Gordon Kahl's folks?
Yes, Gordon Kahl was riding with another individual in a little AMC Hornet that was first to turn around and wanted to head south, the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then behind him was Kahl's station wagon with 3 other players and Mrs. Kahl.
Okay, now was his son in the second car, or was his son with Gordon?
His son was driving the second car, the Kahl station wagon.
Okay.
And there was another individual who had a minor part to play in this, and then another individual who had came from the Kahl area with him to the meetings, who's still in federal prison, named Scott Fall. So now what we have is these marshals and our local deputy sheriff in a Ram Charger blocking off the Kahl vehicles, which are trying to make a quick U-turn and head south. And they all get out of their cars and they're aiming at each other. So
right there at this farmhouse, they're getting out. They're getting out of this farmhouse.
What was that?
They're getting out at the farmhouse.
Yes, right in front of this farm. The approach in front of the farmhouse. The farmhouse at the time was a trailer house, and it was probably 100 to 125 feet in from the road. So it was a very short area. And the marshal's car and the Kahl people are all within probably 40 feet of each other, aiming high-powered rifles and pistols and whatever else, shotgun, whatever else they had, aiming at each other, and it was a standoff. Meanwhile, the marshal from Bismarck is calling the chief marshal, Muir, who is 0.8 of a mile ahead of him, sitting on his hill with his red light flashing, saying, "Hey, we're staring down the barrels of these guns. What do we do? Get down here and help us," pleading for help. And it took Marshal Muir about, I think it was 8 minutes to finally go them 0.8 of a mile.
Oh my gosh.
Trying to figure out what to do. And it turns out they were over their heads, and instead of just getting out of there, they decided to see what they could do to at least bring this to an impasse.
Now, so you got Kahl people in the driveway, and behind him is other vehicle, and then in the road, blocking the road, is it? Going into town is a police vehicle, a Ram Charger?
A Ram Charger, a Dodge Ram Charger,
and,
yes.
And then is there anybody else with them, those 2 officers? Is there another car there?
The two federal deputy marshals, a guy named Cheshire was driving, and then another guy named Hobson. And then our local deputy sheriff was riding in their back seat. And to tell you how this thing, when it went down, when this thing started, and the marshals stopped blocking off the road and so on, they tell our local deputy sheriff, you just stay in the back seat here. And he's like, "To hell with these guys, I'm getting out."
Now, was that Steve Schnabel?
He knew at that point that they didn't know how to handle a situation like
Was that Steve Schnabel?
No, that was Brad Kapp.
Okay. Now, didn't Steve Schnabel show up with Wigglesworth at the other end of this situation?
Yeah, Schnabel was the one that went to give him directions, and they put a shotgun in his hand. He wound up driving his vehicle up to the top of this vacant farmhouse hill, and he was assisting Marshal Muir and Deputy Marshal Wigglesworth. And Wigglesworth is the guy that came up with the phony APB. So here Schnabel is with these guys, and he's following. In fact, he's driving alongside of them as they come down this county road, taking 8 minutes to go 0.8 of a mile. So he gets down there, and this is really a quagmire. People aiming at each other. Schnabel don't know who's a lawman. He don't know the 2 marshals from Bismarck. He had just met the 2 from Fargo. He don't know who Kahl is. He don't know who the other people are. He don't know who's supposed to be a good person or a bad person. He don't know, the guy is like, talk about a situation to be cast in.
I couldn't imagine that. Not knowing anything.
It's unbelievable.
Scary.
This whole story is so absurd. And as this stuff is going on, the police vehicles are on the road, and the Kahl people are to the west of the cops. some are northwest, some are southwest. But anyway, the call people are to the west of what's going on. The sun is setting at this time pretty much directly to the west. So not only is Schnabel trying to figure out who's who, but he's looking into the sun while he's doing this.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, that's
so let's
impossible.
add that into the mix.
That's impossible.
Oh, it's just this whole thing is just it's people said for years a book ought to be written about this, and
yeah, thank God it was.
The answer to that.
So now, how close in proximity? Now you weren't at the scene, but I guess when you did arrive, the cars were still in the same place as it was during the shootout. How close in proximity was these cars, like Gordon Kahl or his son from the marshals and so forth? Because in the diagram, it's really pretty close.
Yes, they were all within about 50 to 75 feet.
That's not very far at all. That's the length of a mobile home or something, or a tractor trailer.
That's right. Exactly. Everything was very close, and then let's throw high-powered rifles into the mix. There's no missing when you're using a high power at that short a range.
No.
So at any rate, I'm still at the fire station while this stuff is building, not really understanding what's going on, because in my mind, I'm thinking that this incident is taking place 0.8 of a mile or a mile north of town at the vacant farm, and a vehicle comes past the fire station and heads right up into what I'm going to call the danger zone. I can see that this vehicle is going to head right up to a place that no vehicles need to go at this point. So I hop in a cruiser, and I head up there as fast as I can. And when we crested the same hill that Gordon Kahl crested when he saw the police vehicles 0.8 of a mile ahead of him, I got the guy beside me stopped and said, let's get out of here. There's going to be a shootout. And at that point, I could see cars parked in the various areas, and I still don't recall the guns aimed at each other. I was about 300 or 400 feet away, and I just don't recall if I saw rifles out or whatever. But I did go back over that hill and stop innocent traffic from getting into the danger zone. So although I refused to help this, get involved with shooting a farmer, I did get involved with at least keeping innocent traffic out of the danger zone.
Well, once again, like you said, you were not asked to be involved, and so therefore you were doing the duties that you were supposed to be doing, which is protecting your community.
Exactly.
So that was your job. You were not asked to be anywhere else, so you were doing what you're supposed to do, and that's protect your community as a police chief.
Well, that's right. And at one point, I think I think Marshal Meir asked where I was. He started calling in help after they wouldn't listen to me, and after things went as bad as they could get. Then he wants to call in other officers, and it's too late. The best thing they could have done is just turn around and got out of there. But at any rate, I answered back that I'm keeping innocent traffic from getting into the danger zone, so I made my mark. I stayed right there.
Well, that's common practice, too, because in any incident, when there's a fire or there's a police scene where there was a shooting, there's always police officers at the perimeter keeping people, even the media, far away from that location. Somebody has to do that. You just can't leave your town open to have people just come riding up the road on a Sunday evening and going, oh, wow, there's a shootout. Bang, yeah, right in my windshield. Thanks. Somebody's got to be out there.
Absolutely what happened, the way the bullets were flying there, if there would have been other people, well, first of all, they wouldn't have gotten through with the way the police cars and the call vehicles were parked unless they would have taken a ditch, which at that time probably had quite a bit of snow in it. There was no way to just, they would have drove up on this thing and parked until it was over with, and I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere near there with the bullets that were flying around. The chance of innocent people being killed was super, super, super high at that point.
My goodness.
When these people were shooting it out, I don't think anybody really cared who was in the background or what was in the background.
Okay, so now they're up there, and then bullets start flying. And I guess to this day, there's nobody knows who shot first, that shot who, or anything. Maybe Gordon Kahl's son seems to have some evidence, according to your book, that it's perhaps one of the guys actually got shot by their own men. The marshals shot each other, which is not uncommon in some situations.
Well, as messed up as this thing was, and it was messed up, in our book we actually have a drawing from Gordon Kahl and a report that he wrote after the firefight that he mailed to the Fargo newspaper, I think within a week or so after the incident. And it was definitely the only person that could have written what he wrote was him, because he knew too much. You know, he knew more than the average person could have ever imagined about it. He had drawings of where he was when he fired, where he was fired upon, and who fired upon him, and he came out with a very, very accurate set of statements and drawings. Prior to the shooting, I called our ambulance and rescue people to meet me on the near the railroad tracks at Medina, where I had run these people, these marshals out of or away from, because there was a hill between that area and the area where the shooting was actually taking place. So I had the rescue squad and ambulance service on standby right along with me, so that in the event this went down bad, I gave it a 99% chance that there was going to be shooting, based on what Gordon had said and based on the attitudes that I saw that day, and a 1% chance that Gordon would just say, okay, I give up and go along with him. So I had these people parked in an area to where if the 1% would have happened and Gordon would have just surrendered rather than having any problems with his family involved, there was an area between a grain elevator and a large Quonset type building where I would have had the ambulance service and the rescue squad park and hide along with myself to show Gordon that he's, you know, nobody was really out to kill him. I didn't want him, if he did get arrested, I didn't want him coming through town and seeing all this emergency equipment out and think, oh yeah, they were out to kill me, now they're going to get me in jail and all this. You know, I was thinking far enough into this to where I want these people as close to me as I can get them on the rescue squad and ambulance, but I also want a place to hide them so this doesn't turn into some conspiracy theory. So I was thinking that deep into this situation. Well, unfortunately, it didn't go down smooth. The 99% did happen. And the first shot that went off, I was right over the hill from it. It was after I had stopped the car at the crest of the hill and got them to back down the hill with me. And there's speculation that it was, there's two different theories. One is that Marshall Muir, who had a .38 caliber handgun, fired the first shot, and it hit Yori Kahl's .45 automatic handgun in a shoulder holster, and if it wouldn't have hit that, it would have tore right into his heart. On the other hand, I heard, I was close enough, and I've been hunting since I'm 12 years old. The first shot I heard was a rifle shot, and there were several rifles out there that day, and that shot hit meat. I've been deer hunting enough to know when you squeeze the trigger and your shot goes off and you got a hit, it makes kind of a thud sound. So as I was over this hill, I heard this bang and then a thud, and I'm going, oh boy, somebody got hit. And a pause of about 5 seconds took place. It was just like one shot and it was over with, and I'm going, this is just somebody, I just knew somebody got shot, but it just, I look back at it, and it's tough to register exactly every tenth of a second that went on, but about 5 seconds later, all of a sudden, it was bang, 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 bang. About, I would say, 20 to 30 shots went off. And what Schnabel tells me was that first shot went off, and then people were yelling at each other, who shot? Who shot? And, you know, nobody was taking credit for the first shot. So it's still somewhat of a mystery. There's the two theories, and we spell both of them out in our book. I know I heard a rifle shot. I don't know who it came from, but I do know that I heard a rifle shot. I'll just put it that way.
And Gordon Kahl's son was shot, and then what eventually ensued was that was it two marshals were killed?
Yes.
And were these the commanding officers, the ones who were in charge? Was that one of the gentlemen who got killed?
Yes, one from Bismarck and one from Fargo were killed on the spot. And what happened was I was down on the inside of the hill towards the community, stopping innocent traffic. And if you can imagine this, a little town in Medina, 500 people, they have about an average of 27 fire and rescue calls a year. And right about the time that the first shot is going to go off, a 65 Ford Mustang starts on fire a block south of me.
Oh, my gosh.
You know, talk about things hitting at once. I'm out there blocking traffic. I see this red 65 Ford Mustang, and all of a sudden the guy pulls over and a bunch of smoke's coming out of his hood. So I send the rescue squad. I say, go over there and put out that guy's fire. They head over, and about the time they extinguish the fire, the first shot goes off. So now I'm standing on the inside of this hill towards the city, and on the other side of the hill is where the action was taking place. And these guys get the fire out. The ambulance pulls out of the area I had them stationed at. Our local deputy sheriff, Brad Kapp, comes running over the hill. His finger is hanging on by a thread, and he's bleeding from a head wound. Some shrapnel hit his head. And I help him in the ambulance. Ambulance turns around, goes to our local clinic where this meeting had just taken place that Kahl had attended. So as they're down there, the rescue squad now has the fire extinguished. They pull up to where I'm at, and I say, okay, the shooting, I can't hear any more shooting. It's been over with for probably a minute, and now it's time for us to go up there and, you know, take care of what's going on. Meanwhile, a brown station wagon comes past me at about, I'm going to guess, 70 miles an hour, or wide open, within the short proximity of this hill, the crest of this hill that I was. And I didn't recognize at the time, but it turns out it was Gordon and Mrs. Kahl in their station wagon heading towards the city.
Oh, my gosh.
Coming back into town. And then right after that, Officer Schnabel's car comes in with the red lights flashing, and that thing comes by me 70, 80 miles an hour. I mean, that thing was just cruising. And I saw a guy slumped over on the passenger side, and I presumed with Schnabel's police car that Schnabel would have been driving it.
Right.
So the rescue squad and I crest the hill. We get up into what had been the danger zone. The ambulance unloads the first patient, who was the deputy sheriff at the local clinic, which was about a mile, a total of about a mile. So it didn't take them long to get down and load the guy and come back for more. And they followed up. We get up the hill, and here's Deputy Marshal Cheshire, who is dead. And there's another marshal on the road who I didn't know at the time, and it was Marshal Hobson. A piece of asphalt, a rock, came out of the road as the result of a ricocheted bullet and hit him in the back of the head. Oh. And poor guy was he never fully recovered from that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he was ruined. He was laying on his side. So he was laying on his back as I approached, and then he rolled over on his side. So I got the rescue squad to start, taking care of him. And then there was a guy who I didn't know standing by the marshal's car, and it turned out to be Deputy Marshal Deputy Marshal Wigglesworth, who's the guy that orchestrated the APB. And then he was, it's like, hey, spick and span, where were you when it hit the fan?
No kidding.
Yeah.
Where was he? Does anybody know?
He said he went around through some trees and broke through a slough and was trying to head a guy off, which happened to be Scott Fall, that was running towards this trailer house and this farm. And I just don't know. I just don't know. Things he's said have been stretched by him to where credibility became a real issue as far as him and I were concerned. But at any rate, he claims he went to head a guy off at the pass, and I do have to back up a little bit. As I crested the hill, stopping this guy, I did notice the standoff was taking place right in front of this local farm. So I called the fire department dispatcher, had him contact that farm family to take cover in the far west end of their house. And right as the phone rang is also the time that the first shot went off. So there was several things happening at once there. And it was a difficult understatement was that it was a difficult situation.
Absolutely. So now these two cars go by you, and you're up at the scene. You're seeing who's dead and who's injured, and it turns out you found Steve Schnabel up there, did you?
Yes, it was
strange. Huh? How could he be in bilocated. He's in two places at once, his car
That's
and
right.
up there.
How could this guy come on? How could this guy come past me? And all of a sudden he's walking out of the ditch saying, "Can I go in the ambulance?" And I said, "Well, yeah. What's going on?" And he says, "Well, I got shot through the leg." And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I help him in the ambulance, and he actually is a sit-up patient. He lucked out and didn't get hit on the bone. It was a flesh wound. Could have been absolutely dangerous. It could have been absolutely deadly to him had it hit the
an artery or something.
femoral artery.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
he lucked out, and it was just a flesh wound. And so I'm really, my thought process is really skewed at this time. It's like 100,000 things going on at once,
Oh, yes.
and I'm trying to stay on top of it, and it's not
Yes.
working. You know, it's just,
Yeah.
it's just a very difficult. So I'm like, well, then who came by with your car? Well, he said, I don't know. I laid in the ditch and got shot laying in the ditch over here, and then Wigglesworth approaches Schnabel and says, "Why did you let them have your car?" You know, as if we were somehow
Aiding and
connected to the
abetting,
call
huh?
people and provided them with a police car and a radio and a red light and all this kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
I mean, just absolutely absurd that this marshal would come up and ask my right-hand man why he let them have his car.
So
It kind of delivers more of a message of what we're dealing with.
So
here.
therefore, Gordon Kahl took your buddy's Schnabel's vehicle away from the crime scene.
That's right. Actually, Scott Fall, the guy who Wigglesworth allegedly was trying to head off at the pass, was over by this trailer house, and he fired some shots. I don't think any of his shots hit anything, but there was a pile of brass. You know, I think 3 or 4 rounds, empty brass cartridges where he was standing. So we're convinced
Wow.
that he did some shooting. But he wound up putting Yori Kahl, who had taken a bullet or two. So in fact, he took several double-aught buck out of Brad Kapp's shotgun, Deputy Sheriff Brad Kapp's shotgun.
Shot
And
Yori Kahl, Gordon's son.
Gordon's son, that's right. Yori was 23 years old at the time. He was placed in the passenger side of Schnabel's car, and then Scott Fall was the driver. And at the time, like I say, this car come by with a guy slumped over. I just assumed it was Schnabel hauling somebody to the
Sure.
doctor's office.
Sure. So
And,
so he's
So it was confusing.
So Schnabel's got wounded, and this all happened within a minute. These guys get out of the cars, they're pointing guns at each other. Somehow a gun goes off. Gordon Kahl's son gets hit. Gordon Kahl lets off some fires, and somebody else. And prior to all that, someone's saying who shot first, and then all of a sudden everybody's shooting. Gordon ends up, I guess, being the winner of that duel, and
Absolutely.
and then his wife was unharmed, and the 2 friends were unharmed that were with Gordon, and there were a couple officers that weren't. Another injured officer and your injured officer, and so this all transpired within about a minute. And you're at the scene. Your friend's going to the hospital, and so now whatever happened to Gordon Kahl?
Well, his son got a ride to the clinic in Schnabel's car by Scott Fall. As Wigglesworth is telling me there's a guy in the trees, you know, we got to watch these trees, we got to get this area lit up, the sun's going down now, a heavy fog is setting in, a very heavy fog is setting in, and our concentration is at this farmhouse, believing there's still a guy at large. When in actuality, Scott Fall, who was the man that had a few empty cartridges over by the trailer house, who loaded Yori Kahl in Schnabel's car, was down at the clinic with Yori Kahl, and Gordon was also at the clinic with his wife. He said goodbye to his wife and his son, and him and Scott Fall hopped in Schnabel's car and headed out of town, we presume to the east. And Gordon was a very sharp guy. He knew the back roads. The heavy fog set in. You know, I mean, he had the upper hand of that situation that whole day. You know, he had the upper hand.
So where did he end up?
Well, the first night they ditched the car underneath an evergreen tree. The car was a dark green Mercury, and they parked it in, underneath some evergreens, so it'd be hard to spot. And I believe they spent the first night in a vacant granary, some vacant farm.
In North
place.
Dakota?
In North Dakota, yes. Near his home area, I would say probably 30 to 40 miles from Medina.
Okay, and then he made his way all the way to Arkansas to a friend of his house, right?
Yes, he hung out in North Dakota, I think, one more night after that, and then Scott Fall turned himself in. He rounded up a lawyer, and he didn't like the sheriff of that area, but he liked the highway patrolman, so he arranged a surrender with this highway patrolman. And then Gordon had somehow got to his farm and got his '66 Rambler, and it was one of them ugly mint green '66 Ramblers. You could see the thing for miles.
Oh,
you know?
Yes.
Oh God, they were just an ugly, ugly vehicle. And I'm not, by any means against Ramblers, but that was an ugly car.
You could spot
At any
it.
rate, he makes it from North Dakota to Arkansas, just taking back roads at first, and then we believe he went right down Highway 75 and Interstate 29. From the Hankinson, North Dakota area,
untouched, and I'm sure
down to Arkansas.
Sure, by this time they had an APB out on him.
The largest and longest APB ever in the history of North Dakota was the Gordon Kahl case, and that all points that we had roadblocks set up all over the state. That went on for I think 2 or 3 days, and Gordon was long gone by then. And he came up on one of the roadblocks was I think as either Iowa or Missouri, someplace south of South Dakota, as I recall. And he pulled up to a roadblock where there was one officer checking cars, and the car ahead of him was stopped, and the officer's talking to the people, and then it was Gordon's turn, and he thought, "Here I go." And the officer just looked the other way and let him drive right by.
Amazing.
So we're not sure if the officer was on his side, or if the officer was scared,
maybe distracted,
or if it was just a fluke.
Yeah, you never know. Strange things, they catch people in strange ways like that too. So he makes it down to Arkansas, right. And he's on the lam for, was it a few months before somebody tipped off the authorities that he was down there?
Yes, this happened February 13th, and I believe it was about June 3rd. The FBI had a tip that he was at a well, it was an earth home where it's like a house, a very fuel-efficient house built into the side of a hill.
Sure.
Of course, when the news got done with it, it was a bunker.
It was a bunker.
You know how that goes. It's either a compound or a bunker.
Right.
But it was a house. And anyway, he had been corralled up in this house, and the owner of it was a guy named Bill Wade, who was about the same size, same weight, bald head, very similar to Gordon Kahl. The tenants were the Ginters, Norma and Leonard Ginter.
And these were friends of Gordon's, right? Friends
Gordon
of Gordon's?
was staying with them. In fact, he was watching national news because it was on national news that his son and friends had been convicted in North Dakota. And he was basically watching the news to see how they were getting sentenced. And he was actually considering probably coming back to help his son and the others out by taking the blame and going back to jail.
Yeah, and his son got rounded up because he was in the hospital, so he was kind of an easy catch. Now, didn't they also take his wife into custody temporarily?
Yes, they did. They took his wife into custody, and she got bonded out. I can't remember if it was weeks. I don't think it was days later. I think it was some weeks later. She finally got bonded out, and they had her charged with first-degree murder and harboring a fugitive and all kinds of stuff.
But they ended up dropping the charges on her, didn't they?
Well, no, she actually went through the jury trial,
really?
And the jury let her go.
And didn't you say that in your book that she was kind of coerced into making some kind of false appeal to Gordon to come home and give himself up or something like that?
Yes, she was. They were going to make life as miserable as they could unless she would help Gordon turn himself in.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So she gets on the news, or they set up like a press conference.
Kind of like our Iranian friends did to our hostages, or the prisoner of war. That's what they do to prisoner of war. They make them. The enemy makes them say stupid things that they don't mean, and that's what the enemy, our enemies do to us in wartime when we're prisoners.
And Mrs. Kahl knew absolutely there was no way Gordon was going to turn himself in. And she, "Oh, Gordon, please come home," and then she cries a little bit, and this is all orchestrated for poor old Gordy to give himself up, and she knew there's no way. They had discussed what was going to happen if something like this ever took place, And she knew absolutely he was never going to show up again, and she did not know where he was. She had no clue where Gordon was, and he did not contact her. The last contact she had with Gordon was at the clinic before Gordon and Scott Fall took off, yet she was followed and hounded for years afterwards.
So Gordon's with these friends, and nobody knows where he's at except the friends that he's actually with, as far as anybody knows. And there's a reward put out for Gordon, and who's the one who collects the reward, which is a rather interesting story.
Well, Gordon had what he called safe houses, or what his friends called safe houses, in Arkansas. And the first one was near Mena, Arkansas, in fact, very close to where the police chief lives, because the person that was harboring Gordon and Gordon would drive to town, and they'd wave at the police chief on the way by when they'd see him on the road and this kind of stuff. And anyway, he wound up from one safe house to another, and as soon as they thought things were getting hot, they'd move him to another one. And there was a gal that knew Gordon from the TV ads, regarding, hey, this guy's wanted and he killed people and on and on. So she turns Gordon in for $25,000.
Now, wasn't that the daughter of the Ginters?
It was the daughter of...
Or one of the other safe houses?
I'm thinking Ed Udy.
But it was a daughter of somebody that was a friend of Gordon's.
That's right, a daughter of somebody that owned a safe house.
So apparently she didn't think too highly of Gordon, at least not as much as the $25,000 that she was going to collect.
Well, I'm sure afterwards Christmas dinners have never been the same at their house either.
Oh, I couldn't imagine.
You can just imagine how when somebody.
Okay. So here's the thing. We got in our second hour. We got about 10 minutes. If it's possible, if I can implore you, since we've gotten so deep into the actual nuts and bolts of it, and I want to get to your side of the story, would you be able to talk with us a little longer?
Sure.
Okay. Well, we're going to do about another 8 minutes on this segment, and then we will fire up another segment, and because we'll go into what the aftermath of this, because that's half of the story is the aftermath, and that's really just as important as what happened to Gordon Kahl, because the aftermath deals with you and Steve, and we have you on, so we're going to talk about you today. So let's do another 8 minutes here. Let's go into this Arkansas thing. What happened there? And then in the next segment, we will discuss the fallout for you and Steve, and then your thoughts about the overall importance of this whole situation. So we got so he's in Arkansas. They get tipped off, and the federal government, these marshals or whoever, come down to where he's at in Arkansas. And can you tell us what happened after that when they got there?
Okay. The people that rented this farmhouse, the Ginters, they can sense something is wrong. They just got this feeling that something's wrong.
While they're in their house, right?
Yes, while they're in their house. This plane has been buzzing over their place all day or for a couple days, and they just have some bad vibes about what's going on. Gordon was in the house. He had just had hot dogs and sauerkraut and mashed potatoes and green beans, and he was watching the news to find out, what was going to happen with his son and the friends. And Ginter was going fishing. So he jumps in the car, and he's heading out to some pond, and he gets about halfway up his road, and these people come out of the woods and stop him and handcuff him and put him on the ground. And they said, "Who's in the house?" And he wasn't too cooperative. And anyway, some more agents, local, state, and federal, went down to the house. They got the place surrounded.
A whole slew of people. Heavily armed slew of officers for one man, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. These people were really geared up, but they meant business.
It's not like Waco.
So they go down, and they get Mrs. Ginter to come out of the house. And actually, they had Mr. Ginter try to call his wife out, and he conveniently says, "Norma, the FBI's out here." Gordon was a little hard of hearing, so he couldn't get it. But Mrs. Ginter comes out, and they pull her around, handcuff her, and down she goes. And anyway, they ask if Gordon Kahl's in the house, and this keeps going back and forth. Well, there's a local sheriff, the sheriff of Lawrence County, Arkansas, named Gene Matthews. And he's with the Deputy U.S. Marshal Hall, Jim Hall, and a state police investigator named Ed Fitzpatrick. And the three of these officers go to the house, and the official story goes something like this. They get Mrs. Ginter out of the house. They go in. Gordon Kahl is hiding, and the sheriff and Gordon Kahl shot each other simultaneously. And the sheriff lived for a while and then died, and Gordon died instantly. And there's all kinds of evidence to refute that story. The unofficial report goes more like this. These three officers go into this place where Gordon was, and they see him sitting there watching TV. Gordon's a little hard of hearing, and they walk in, and the understanding we have is Deputy Marshal Jim Hall from the Arkansas Marshal Service, the District of Arkansas, puts a bullet in the back of Gordon's head, and it doesn't quite come all the way through. Gordon falls off the chair, dead instantly. The sheriff, who's from that area, says, "My God, you just shot Bill Wade." Now remember, Bill Wade's the owner of the house, who was very similar in appearance, bald head, 160 pounds, 5'6". So now this marshal thinks he just assassinated the wrong guy.
No.
So the sheriff gets a bullet
to cover up the assassination witness.
To the ground, and then Ed Fitzpatrick goes out of the house, runs around with his shotgun, sticks it through a window, and starts blindly shooting around the inside of his house. And as I say in the book, that's one trick we never learned at the North Dakota Law Enforcement Academy. At any rate, Hall comes out of the house, and he's hugging a tree and throwing up, and this guy is not doing very well. And I can see why if he thought he just assassinated a wrong guy.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that would do it. Well, pretty soon, Sheriff Matthews comes out of the house, and he was not liked by many law enforcement people down there, and especially one of his own men. So there's snipers set up around this house, and the sheriff comes out under this yard light, which is right at the corner of the house, puts his arms in the air, says, "Don't shoot me, I'm your sheriff," and he's full of mud and full of blood and whatever else. And he takes a bullet from a high-powered rifle right between the bulletproof vest underneath his arm. It goes into his lungs, and it isn't long, and he's dead.
Well, who did that?
Well,
he's coming out of the house after they killed who they thought was Gordon Kahl, and he's telling everybody, "Hey, I'm one of you guys," with his arms in the air, and someone shot him anyway.
And he took a bullet right in the lungs, and it killed him. And it's made to look as though he shot Gordon and Gordon shot him simultaneously. Or the official report is the two shot each other simultaneously. Well, it's physically impossible for two people to be shooting at each other and one take it from a high, in the same room,
right,
and a high-powered rifle bullet enter from a high angle between a bulletproof vest on the side of somebody and get in the lungs. And the sheriff had a .40 caliber. Or a .41 caliber, anyway, a heavy-duty handgun, and that if he would have shot Gordon in the back of the head, there's no way Gordon could have returned fire, and he'd have had to be behind Gordon to shoot him in the back of the head.
Yeah,
so,
if that was Gordon that got shot in the head, there's no way he could have shot anybody, that's for sure.
Well, absolutely. And had he been shot with that .41, I believe it was .41 caliber that the sheriff had, it states it in the book, and it's been a while since I read the book, but at any rate, that bullet would have come right through his head.
Well, here's a question. Okay, here's I think this is a pretty pertinent question. You can debate whether or not Gordon Kahl was the guy he killed, but the fact of the matter is, did Bill Wade ever show up again?
Well, yeah, Bill Wade gets a call at his house, and somebody says, "Well, Bill." He says, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, you're alive." He says, "Oh, yeah, I'm alive and well." And they said, "Well, we just heard over the scanner that you've been shot."
So we can assume by that, then, that was Gordon Kahl that got shot.
All the police tapes have been confiscated by the FBI and are locked up for national security.
National security.
There's IRS agents that want to dig into this case and learn more about it, and the case is locked up for national security.
That's insane.
So under the guise of national security, people ain't talking. if in Arkansas, like in North Dakota, it was easy to get a grand jury, it would be really interesting to see what really went on there. Every day that goes by is a day against us because more and more of the actors and players died.
Yes.
Or they die. But back then, see, in North Dakota, the county attorney can call for a grand jury, the county commission can call for one, or a citizen that has 10% of the voters of the county in the last governor's election can call for a grand jury. We wanted to get a grand jury in Arkansas because we knew this was so bogus. The Kennedy assassination is probably second to this as far as a cover-up. And we believe there should be some people that are probably retired law enforcement now that should be in prison for the rest of their lives for what went on down there.
Let's go ahead and we'll stop this segment, and then we'll pick it up again, and we'll finish up this portion right here very quickly, and then we're going to move on to the aftermath, which is very important. So stay with us, and we'll do another one with Darrell Graf. All right, so we've got Darrell back here for, half an hour, another hour, however long it takes to tell this story. But we're going to finish up real quick now what we just finished in the last segment, talking about what happened in Arkansas at the Ginter house where Gordon was. And it appears that the mistaken identity was just that, was a mistake, and was not Bill Wade. It was probably more than likely Gordon Kahl, as far as we can tell. And so there's some other strange thing that occurred there with sending somebody on the roof doing something. Do you remember about that, and can you tell us about it?
Oh, yes. That was the local police officer named Tommy Lee from the little town of Ravenden who was called in to assist. And after the story we get is after it was questionable whether it was actually Gordon Kahl or not that was killed in that house, and incidentally it was Gordon. It turned out that it was Gordon, so we know now that is cut and dried. It definitely was the guy they were after. At any rate, there was a fire in the house. Gordon's hands and feet were chopped off. And
now, do we know if they were chopped off before or after he was shot?
They were. We believe it was chopped off. We believe they were chopped off after he was shot and before he was set on fire.
And do we know why that happened?
The purpose for that would be to burn any small parts beyond recognition, so there wouldn't be any fingerprints, or it was to destroy evidence.
Well, if they were going to kill Gordon Kahl, why would they care if they found out it was Gordon Kahl through his fingerprints?
Because if it turned out that it was Bill Wade.
Oh, at the time they weren't sure.
That's right. They weren't sure.
Okay.
So the evidence had to go.
Okay.
And
so it wasn't like they were just trying to get back at Gordon Kahl because he was a bad guy or anything, like retribution.
No, the evidence had to be destroyed as long as they thought they had the wrong person. And to go a step further with that, at 7 o'clock the following morning, they were still checking people's trunks in the area looking for Gordon Kahl. So this is information that we've obtained over the years prior to writing the book, and although we weren't in Arkansas, we were in Medina and knew what happened and saw what happened, but we weren't in Arkansas, but a group of retired law people, including Bud Warren, who was the U.S. Marshal under Carter.
That was friendly with Kahl. Friendly with Kahl, so he knew him
and
personally.
Jack McLam, who was
decorated,
probably known by many of the people that get onto your programs.
Right. Very decorated Arizona police officer.
That's right. He's a former Phoenix officer, and has a program called Aid and Abet, or has a publication called Aid and Abet.
Yeah, Aid and Abet for former police and military personnel, and I've heard they do pretty well.
Yes, they conducted an investigation of the Arkansas incident, and
and they conducted it like a police investigation should be conducted, right? With their experience.
What was that? I'm sorry.
The thing that he wanted to bring out in this was the experience that they have as police officers. They conducted an investigation according to that protocol.
Absolutely.
To their experience. So they didn't just go in there and chuck around. They actually tried to conduct an actual investigation. Is that right?
Yeah, they did. That's right. They did. And they found they found lots of physical evidence that does not match the official story that the federal government put out.
And what stands out there?
Match.
What stands out there?
Well, one is that one shot the other. They shot each other simultaneously, and there's no way that could have happened.
Well, they said in your book there's a diagram where it said he was hiding between a counter and a refrigerator or something that he could not physically have gotten into, for one thing.
Well, that's right. There was a little shelf in there that had Leonard Ginter's rifle loading equipment on it, and the fire melted that shelf away. So after the fact, they say, or that little cupboard away. After the fact, they say, oh, Gordon was hiding right in this vacant area. Well, in actuality, it was not a vacant area until after they burned up the evidence. So there's things like that have surfaced that just make this case horrible. And again, I wish that we could have got a grand jury down there, because there are some people that should be in prison till the end of time.
Well, now, two things. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up, and the reason why I brought it up was getting his feet and his hands cut off. When I first heard about this case, I was under the impression, I can't say for sure if it was because the way it was presented or the underlying feeling that you were getting, or it was just something that I figured up, was that it was retribution, a kind of degrading thing to cut his hands and feet off, kind of like what the mob does, to people. They cut part of your body off as kind of like just another dig into you, that they they conquered you. So I wanted to just set that straight, to get that in fact was not the case. It wasn't some wild federal agent with some axe just chopping up Gordon Kahl because he hated his guts because he killed federal marshals. It was, in fact, from what your understanding is, because they thought they killed the wrong guy and to cover up murder, that they were going to just do that so they wouldn't have evidence to prove that it was him. And that's also why you believe that they caught the place on fire, was to burn the body beyond recognition so they wouldn't get in trouble for killing the wrong guy. Is that right?
That's what we believe, yes.
Okay.
And it ties in with the fire. Had it not been for the fire, then we would figure, well, somebody got a little wild with an axe just to, like you say, like the mob would do, to deliver the message.
Mm-hmm.
But because the place was burned up, and at first when the FBI was questioned about why did you guys torch this place, they denied doing it, and then after
they denied doing it. Who
yes,
they say?
Yes,
who
they denied doing it?
Would they say they did it themselves, like in Waco, that they set their own self on fire or something?
Well, I can't remember exactly what they said, but they denied doing it, and then later they denied asking this Raven Dentown Marshal, Tommy Lee, to go find some fuel
and climb up on the roof.
Some gasoline and diesel fuel, and he sat up on top of the roof and stirred it up, mixed it up, and then he poured it down the chimney. And I think it was some smoke grenades that got thrown in the place that ignited this fresh gas.
Now, what you just said, let's, and I want to bring this point up. People talk about conspiracy. Now, what you just said is identical to what happened in Waco with the Branch Davidians, because there was fuel. And then they shot those grenades in there, that gas, that CO2 gas or whatever it is? CS gas, that ignited the fuel. And they tried to say that these people inside set themselves on fire like they were going to martyr themselves. But in fact, what you just said sounds like exactly what happened in Waco, where fuel was put there, and then they sent the gas that was the igniter. And there was a gentleman who I think was either murdered or suicided or accidentally had an accident of some unfortunate kind. He was studying the FLIR images, the image, I think it's the infrared images, and he had some damning evidence against the government's story about those types of incidents at Waco. He had the evidence, and then unfortunately he met a premature end and was never able to testify. But I found that very interesting, because it's the exact type of situation that happened in Waco to start that fire. Fuel introduced, and then after that, something to ignite it, which was some kind of tear gas or something that made it happen. So I just wanted to point that out. When people think there's weird conspiracy theories, all you got to do is look at the facts and evidence of a story. If you spend the time to look deep enough, and you'll see a lot of stuff for yourself, and you won't have to take anybody's word for it. So,
well, that's right. And I would like to go back one more from that. Prior to the Kahl incident, there was the case at Whidbey Island, Washington, and I can't remember the man's name they were after, but that was the first one I'd ever heard of where they poured fuel down the chimney and got it going.
Oh, no, that wasn't...
Kahl was the second.
That wasn't Kaczynski, was it?
Nope.
Yeah, see, I'm not familiar with this
was
one.
the Unabomber.
You're right.
This guy was allegedly a white supremacist. And it's Whidbey, W-H-I-D-B-E-Y, I believe. Whidbey Island, Washington.
And they did the same type of thing. Oh, that's
yes.
interesting.
Pour gasoline or fuel, a mixture down the chimney and let her buck. And it takes out the evidence and the people. I mean,
oh, my
it's cut
gosh.
and dried.
So they have this burned house and this burned body. And whatever happened to the Ginters and stuff? Did they ever put them on trial for aiding and abetting or something like that?
Oh, yes. Ginters went to prison, I think, for 3 years apiece. I believe they have both passed on since now because they were in their, I think, early 70s in 1983.
Oh, yeah.
And I've talked to both of them on the phone in as late as 97, as I recall, when we started writing the book. There was some questions that I had, and very, very nice people to visit with on the phone. You know, they were just both had been in prison, but were very eager to get their story out. And I almost conducted the things that we didn't see, almost like a police investigation, where I'd interview the people and had a pretty good feel for whether they were lying or telling the truth. And I really saw that they had no reason to lie with the things that they told us, which we ultimately put in the book.
So the other
credible
investigation with Jack McLam and Bud Warren and them, so what were their ultimate conclusions about what happened down there? Did they have any?
Their conclusions are that, like my second story goes, that's where I got it from with regard to the first story, the physical evidence doesn't add up, and the second story, that the Sheriff Gene Matthews was shot by probably one of his own deputies, that Marshal Hall was out throwing up beside a tree, and State Police Officer Fitzpatrick was, blindly shooting through, stuck the barrel through the window and started shooting around inside this place, and Kahl was actually laying dead on the floor when all this took place. And at one point or another, Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas when this took place, and some law enforcement agency, and I can't remember if it was FBI or who it was, asked for a gunship to be brought in, and they also asked for several thousand rounds more of ammunition as they were peppering this house, just riddling it with bullets. They wanted thousands of more rounds of ammunition, and Bill Clinton wouldn't give them the gunship. I think that was something that they expect him to do through the National Guard, and I don't know if a gunship means a helicopter or an assault vehicle. That I don't know, but anyway, the whole case down there is so absurd. It would be so interesting to have had a grand jury back then, or even now, to find out what really happened.
Yeah, and
interesting to find out what happened.
Yeah, and as we know with 9/11 and Kennedy and all that, those things never seem to happen rightfully and done in the right way.
That's right. There's always, and then people get accused of oh, you're nothing but a conspiracy theorist. But you know what? When you go through something like this, there's a lot of conspiracy involved.
Well, the one thing I like to point out to people is, for those who don't believe in conspiracy theories, they must not know the federal law. There's actually a charge for conspiracy. So you figure that out. If there wasn't no conspiracy, you wouldn't have a charge for conspiring. So, of course, I heard from a source a long time ago that the conspiracy theory phrase was put out by those who are the conspirators to discredit those like us who are on to what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And as you know, and as you mentioned, and we'll talk in a little bit, the well-meaning people who don't know about this kind of thing, aren't connected, don't pay attention, just look at what's been fed to them from the conspirator side through the mainstream media. They don't know this stuff, so they're gullible. So anyway, in the end,
I was back before this happened to me, being a small town guy, sure. I would have never expected this stuff
you were
to be
thrown
true.
into this, and it was crazy. So let's wrap this Arkansas thing up. Is there any more that happened? The Ginters went to prison, you had a second investigation by some independent men, law enforcement personnel, and they said that, what you say doesn't jibe with what we had found, which, in fact, Gordon was basically assassinated, murdered, because he didn't even have a chance to defend himself. So they just came up and shot him in the back of the head and thought they got the wrong guy and burned it up, sent the Ginners to prison. And
that's a good overview.
That's kind of it. And now what happened to the other players in this, like Scott and Yori Kahl? Yori Kahl's still in prison, isn't he?
Yes, and so is Scott Fall. Both of them got, I think they're eligible for parole in 2013. But I don't know about Yori, but Scott's had some parole hearings, and he won't admit that he's done anything contrary to the laws of our government, and as a result, they're not letting him out. And I was told by a federal agent one time that if Scott would just admit that he did something wrong, that he would be released because he's not considered a threat to society. But Scott is holding his ground.
That's what they always want. Plead guilty even though you're not guilty, and we'll cut you a deal. We'll make it easy on you. Just so they can say that they won on paper. IRS likes to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and Scott isn't. He's staying in, so
yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen.
And I seen that in doing a search on this topic that I think we mentioned. I don't think it was in your book. That Yori Kahl has got another lawyer, or had another lawyer maybe a year or two ago. I don't know how current this is, and that they said that an autopsy conducted proved that Yori did not actually fire the first shot, as some allege, and did not, therefore, in fact, kill the officer that they claim he killed, because the officer was killed with shotgun, and Yori didn't have a shotgun. Only the federal marshals supposedly had a shotgun. They think it was friendly fire that killed the marshal, and not Gordon Kahl's son Yori. So therefore, he's innocently in jail.
Yeah, I've been contacted by several of his attorneys over the years, and I provide him the truth as far as whatever I can provide, I provide, and he seems to hit a roadblock. I didn't quite mean it that way. He seems to.
Oh yeah, he hit a roadblock, all right.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what he tries, it just don't work, and that's probably going to continue.
Okay, now, so that's the end of that story. It was a long story, and I'm sure we could have found a way to make it a little bit longer than we did, and I certainly didn't intend to be quite that long, but I want to get it out. If it comes out naturally, let it go. Let's talk about the fallout from this. You're in a small town of 500 people. You've been there, born and raised. Your family's been there forever. Your dad's got a company that caters to the farmers. You're on the fire department associated with the police, the rescue squad, chief of police. And you, I guess, had a pretty good relationship with the local government there. In your book, I think you mentioned that just weeks or days before this, you guys were on terms about, hey, does the police department need anything? Is everything cool? What can we do for you? And things are just, pretty good up until this incident. What happens to your life after this Gordon Kahl incident?
Well, actually, things were very good up until this incident. I was 27 years old, prime of my life. A lot of things were happening. I was very busy. Besides my local involvement with emergency services, I was a member of the church, and I had a little sideline business going, which provided security officers to a federal radar facility in North Dakota. So I was really kind of entrepreneurish. I had an invention. I invented a piece of firefighting equipment. I was really on a roll. And all of a sudden, things out of my control take place on February 13th. And 2 weeks later, I believe it was February 28th, the mayor calls in the entire police department. Now, this police department, wasn't a big paid job. I was volunteering my time. Schnabel was getting paid, and the people that were working by the hour were getting paid. But I was just volunteering my time to administrate this department. At any rate, the mayor calls all of us in for a meeting and says, you people are all done.
Now, you people means what?
The police department.
He
got rid of all of us.
He just brought you in a couple of weeks after this and said you're fired?
Yes.
And reason
being? Didn't ask
being?
what happened, didn't ask why it happened, didn't ask how it happened, didn't ask what our involvement was. And we were we were told by the U.S. attorney not to discuss this thing with anyone.
With anyone, media or anybody? You couldn't talk to anybody, the media or anybody?
Yeah, they didn't want us talking to anybody because we might let something out.
Was you under a gag order legally, or did they just ask you to, hey, let's not do this?
No, it was kind of one of them things where
a tacit understanding.
We highly recommend you don't talk to anybody about this case.
And you thought, well, they're federal, they know how this goes, so we just won't do that. We won't talk to anybody.
Add the fear of a 27-year-old into this mess.
Sure. Well, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, scared of the power, scared of everything at that point. Scared I was going to be killed by Gordon, that he'd come back and kill us. Clean up any witnesses.
Now, there were stories about that going around, right? That Gordon.
Oh, absolutely.
You heard that Gordon was coming after you.
Yep. I got a call from the FBI that some posse people were coming to town. And someplace in a book I have around here yet, I think I still have the license numbers written in that watch for this gray Ford and a gold Lincoln and a Texas license plate and a Wisconsin license plate and all this. You know, it was a hair-raising time. And in Medina, I had the open door policy at my house. You know, I mean, when people showed up.
Yeah, your house was the police station, basically, as far as the office.
Well, actually, I had an office in the garden level, but the main floor. I had built the house a year before, and I don't think I knew where any keys were for it because in a little town like that, you don't lock nothing.
Well, that's true.
You know, and friends would come over and stop by, and hey, that's just the way it was. And all of a sudden.
Now, what happened? What happened right after that day? You know, after that day up until the 2-week period. I mean, what was going on? Was the media going in? Were you getting deposed by the feds? Was the local community asking you questions? What was your neighbors saying? What kind of thing was going? Give us a feel of what was happening to you before you got fired.
A lot of people who I considered friends turned out not to be friends because they would listen to any gossip, rumor, innuendo. And in any law enforcement situation, there's people that don't like you. The drug dealers don't like you.
Sure.
The child molesters don't like you.
Absolutely.
You know, there's people that just don't like you. So we had them people just taking full advantage of the situation. Oh, God, the local police department did this and did that and caused all this to happen.
So they blamed it on you?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Because you were the local boys and they knew it had to be your fault, right? They really did. They really blamed this on you after what you told us about. Well, I guess they didn't probably know really at that time what was going on, did they?
No, and nobody was talking.
And you couldn't tell them.
Weren't talking.
You couldn't say anything when you were asked, so they assumed that it was partly your blame. That's what your neighbors are thinking. And the feds are saying, don't talk to anybody. What about the media? You mentioned some stories about the media coming in.
They were brutal. They were looking for the person with the most responsibility and least amount of power, and they found it in me. These media people were absolute tapes. If I've ever met people that shouldn't be on this earth, let's start there. They would come to me and say, well, we heard this and this, and what they'd do is go to a bar or go to a drug dealer that didn't like us and hear all this stuff. You had drug dealers
in Medina back then, huh?
Oh yeah, and we were really close to shutting them down.
Wow.
Oh yeah, we had if you can believe this, we had loads coming in on the Greyhound bus.
You're kidding! It's your little town.
Oh yeah, and it was kind of a little hub for one guy that he had customers from all over that would.
My goodness.
The bus would bring in the load and so on, and a bus depot agent would contact me and say, hey, there's a load coming. So we were getting ready for this big drug bust, and all of a sudden all this stuff happened. And we're not sure if the mayor was hooked up in this thing or not, because when he called us in and fired us, we're not sure. We're not sure exactly what happened.
Yeah, because life does go on after the Gordon Kahl thing. You're still, got your daily duties, so you'd still be doing those investigations.
Oh, absolutely. And the things that were going on, first of all, when you're in a small department and something big happens, sleep is something you don't get any of. That's just a rare commodity. So after about 36 hours of being awake, either from the phone ringing continuously or flashbacks of the gunfight and the results thereof, a lot of psychological issues were springing up. You know, fear that there was people on the loose from other places that were going to come in and kill us or clean up the witnesses. Fear that Gordon would come back and kill. Fear of telling somebody an answer that they deserve to get, and then having the federal government say, look, we told you to keep your mouth shut. What are you disclosing this information for? Lots and lots of fear from every angle. So, you know, we stayed armed. We stayed, you know, put bulletproof vests on.
You walked around like that every day, all day, huh? You said you slept with your guns by your side, right?
Absolutely. And it had been so peaceful, you know, like I said, I built a house and didn't even know where the keys for the locks were because I never locked the place.
And then you had to figure
out where the keys to... And all of a sudden it turns into...
I need the keys.
Yeah, all of a sudden I needed the keys because this place was locked solid, and there was a high-powered rifle by my bedroom window.
Now,
and, you know, I mean, we were really in high gear.
Now, how long did this continue, this type of activity on your part? A year?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, now...
At least a year.
Now, that means that's after you got fired. You still were at that level of heightened alert.
That's right. We got fired, and really the city should have been doing things to protect us, and instead they took away the little power that we had, being local peace officers.
Was there anybody on your side? Was there anybody?
Well, yeah, there was some family members and a few friends.
And how about the city council or anything like that?
There was one city councilor, our police commissioner, a female, and she stood up for us 100%. And that mayor had the brains of an earthworm. We had another guy on there who was a half-wit, related to a lot of people in town, so he got elected. And then there was another half-wit that retired and, you know, got his position on the city council. These people had leadership abilities of, they had the leadership abilities of a
rock.
A rock or a bum that sleeps under a
make real
bridge
obvious.
someplace.
So did they tell? They didn't tell you why you were being fired, or did they say we're firing you because of your handling of this affair?
Well, no, they didn't bring this into it. The mayor left this out of it, and what he did, about 48 hours after the shootout, the town is swarming with media. You know, a town of 500 people, and the satellite trucks are in town. I mean, this thing was.
So you had the big media in there too, huh? The national media.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Chicago Sun-Times.
Now was CNN down there? Did CNN show up at that time? I know they were young.
No, Channel 11, KTHI out of Fargo, was the local connection for CNN. So they'd come out and do their interviews, and then they would provide the material to CNN.
But all this time, you were a mum. Your lips were sealed.
Pretty much. There was certain things I knew I could say, and I would, but there was things I knew I didn't dare get close to, and I would avoid them, and I would sometimes stonewall like presidents do.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's okay for them to do it, but not me and you.
But not for that's right, not for us. Well, at any rate, after like 36 or 48 hours with no sleep, there's an old poem about the little old lady that had the little old house and the little old broom and the little old car and all this. Okay, anyway, this little old lady lived close to the high school. And a couple of local punks went out of their way to harass this old lady, walk across her yard, and she'd be out there. She's probably, 4'8" and about 75 years old, and she'd go out and shake the broom at him, get off my yard and all this.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, these guys are throwing firecrackers under her window, and she's scared to death because pretty much the whole town heard the shooting go on. It was so close to town you could hear the reports of the guns throughout the community.
Yeah.
And here this poor woman lives alone, scared to death of everything. She's just a little old lady that's scared of everything. And she calls and says, these two certain boys were throwing firecrackers under my windows, and I'm scared because it relates to the shooting and on and on. So I go down to the local high school, and I want to talk to these two punks, and the superintendent's not in, and the principal's not in, and there's no teachers that I can get my hands on to say, we need to get these guys straightened out. So I'm in there, and I say, at least 36 hours with no sleep, and I'm getting unfriendly by then. And these punks come in, and I said, look, we got trouble And I indicated by raising my hand as far over my head as I could, saying, we got trouble this deep in town. Can't you leave that old lady alone? And, well, we didn't do nothing to her. Well, this old lady knew them kids. It's a town of 500. She knew what she was talking about. So I grabbed the one and put him up against the wall and never hit him, but I delivered the message to him.
Right.
Let him go. Second one come in, same thing. We didn't do nothing to her. And I'm like, yeah, this ain't going with me. So picked him up off the chair, held him against the wall, explained things to him, sat him back down in the chair, turned him loose. And the parents of these kids went absolutely wild because I roughed up their kids. No regard for the 75, 80-year-old lady who was so small. These kids shadowed her when they were probably fourth graders, and here they were like sophomores or juniors in high school, picking on this poor old lady. So that's what the mirror used. Instead of saying, hey, we got to get some help in for you because you've been awake for too long, or we need to get more cops in here to help you with some local duties, whatever. It was, well, you're fired for roughing up
Well, the
kids.
funny thing is too, you don't fire a whole department when only one or two police officers are involved.
That's right. I was the only one involved in it, and although Schnabel, with his wounded leg, rode down to the school with me, he was, as I recall, he was in a different room with the secretary visiting with her while I was having this private meeting with these two jerks. And he fires the whole department, including his nephew was one of my cops.
That's amazing. Well, maybe it was something with the drug thing. I mean, that's something you would know better than anybody else. You were involved in studying.
Well, there was something wrong. There was obviously more than we've read into it.
Because if from the federal government standpoint, if they were to like muscle for no reason, it wouldn't really do the federal government any good to have you guys fired, because then you'd be free to talk because you've already lost your job. So then you could talk to whoever you want. So you wouldn't be trying to keep your lips shut. You wouldn't have anything to protect. So I don't know what I don't see the federal government having any hand in pressuring your mayor to say, hey, get rid of that department. It wouldn't serve them any good.
No, it wasn't the feds. It was the idiot. The idiot that was related to a lot of people in town and got elected as mayor, and he's no longer with us. 26 years have gone by, and he made it for about, I suppose, 18 or 19 of them.
Now, you also said something about a school teacher and a church and a guy who was a big contributor to this very small church, and why don't you relate that story?
Okay. The superintendent of the school was one of these people that all he had done in his life is go to school. He started in grade school,
professional
and he went
student.
to high school. Yep, a professional, and then he gets out and he becomes a teacher, and then he becomes a superintendent, and then he is probably one of the highest paid people in our little community, and he goes to this church, and his big Baptist, and I had actually gone to that church a few times, and the pastor was a good friend of mine. And the pastor's wife was fifth grade teacher. So the pastor, because of this local doctor who held the meetings that to help these farmers, and I, for doing what I could to save the community, the local pastor of the Baptist church had a prayer for us, Dr. Martin and I, and this superintendent of the school gets up and walks out, and he is hot. He is no longer going to this church. He is no longer going to contribute to the church. And being the largest contributor, the most well-paid person probably in the community, and the largest contributor to the church, that's a big thing. So the church calls a meeting, and the Baptist Conference from Aberdeen, South Dakota comes to town to try to straighten this mess out. And the pastor had to take his prayers for us back. So this
take his prayers back? His prayers that he's praying for you we hope you make it through this, or whatever he says. They're asking him, you got to take your prayers back. God didn't.
Yep.
You tell God you want those prayers back. You can't say anything nice about these. It's unbelievable. Talk about conspiracy, being nuts to believe in conspiracy. You'd be a nut to do that.
Well, the pastor bucked it, and his life was made tough on his wife because she worked for this guy.
Oh, Lord. That's now. See, the story, folks, here is not let's make fun of the conspiracy theory nuts. Let's make fun of the people who do this kind of thing. This is nuts. You don't need a conspiracy. We can all play that game. We can all see this and be a spectator at that sport. Okay, so your whole community basically is just kind of like on your butt, and the media is kind of like doing this thing that I heard. It was a little joke that said I call them as umpires. I call them as I see them, but if I don't see them, I make them up.
There you go. That's about what happened. They would when the U.S. attorney told me don't talk. I knew that I had a little lateral room, or that I was going to have to use some lateral room, because I knew that I'm going to have to say something. I had been to a peace officers conference, and they said, if we ask questions, you may not be able to answer them, but you better tell us something. So I went to, I would give statements, but very generic and general, and I made really, really sure not to place any blame or to try to embarrass the families of the deceased officers. Or, I was very, very careful. I treated those like I would want to be treated had this been the other way around. And here's what I got from one witch. She was a reporter from a Fargo TV station, and she delivers the message that she wants to interview me, and that if I don't talk to her, she's going to make me look bad. And that's a little tough to take when you got the U.S. attorney saying you keep your mouth shut about this case, and then you got a reporter that says you talk to us or we're going to make you look bad.
So what happened?
And talk about it devastating. Well, I got a hold of her, and I very gently told her what I could say without getting into trouble with the United States attorney.
Was she understanding?
No, not at all.
She held her ground to be a jerk.
She wanted to be first with the news, and she didn't care what happened to anybody else, especially me.
So did she make you look bad?
No, but only because I was able to answer the questions very generally, and she took that. So I came out. I never come out good, but at least I come out without having the bullet put to me.
So this is how long did this media circus go on? Do you remember how long after this?
Weeks. They would pick up a little information here or there, and they did stuff like this. Well, Graf, we heard you were at the meeting. Did you tip call off because you were there? I said, well, first of all, I wasn't at that meeting. I was out. Actually, I was out. A friend of mine got a new 357 Magnum, and we were out shooting at pop cans and beer cans and stuff that afternoon. I didn't even know there was a meeting going on until the deputy sheriff had me located so he could use my portable radio.
Well, were they thinking... Go ahead.
Yeah, so anyway, there was a lot of innuendo. Like I said, if I'm a Catholic and Capone's a Catholic, there's got to be a connection there. And that was the game these people were playing at every stage, because they weren't getting the answers they wanted from the people that knew what was going on, and because we weren't saying much, because we were ordered not to say much.
And then you said the bad guys in town that didn't like you anyway were probably feeding them some stuff to make you look like you were kind of implicated, like you were part of this
absolutely, absolutely. These people took these people, the drug dealers and so on, took every opportunity they had to just drive us right into the ground.
Now, you said it got so bad that you guys actually had to take off and take leave and go hide out somewhere for a while just to get your bodies and your minds back together.
Yes, we did, because we couldn't remain in the little town, because these people their attitude hadn't changed. If before February 13th, 83, if somebody would have come to Medina and said, hey, I'm looking for Graf, they would have pointed out exactly where I was at. Well, after February 13th, they should have known enough, because of this incident. You don't point out where this guy's at, because it's probably a very dangerous individual looking for him, and they would still point out where we were at.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, we were on the run for a while. We stayed in close touch with the FBI in case they came up with any questions that we might know the answer to. We'd call in and say, hey, anything for us today? And nothing there. And it went as far as even on the 20th anniversary of this incident in 2003, Carl Wigglesworth, the deputy marshal that organized this phony APB and got this whole mess started, he went as far as to say that, well, I'm going to tell you something I've never told you before. And he gets on this TV program, a local statewide Prairie Public TV program, and says, Graf tipped off Gordon Kahl. And
what?
40 years had gone by, and he knew that was not
and
the truth.
And he's still saying that.
and still said it. And in actuality, somebody kept going to the FBI and the Marshal Service telling them that I tipped off Gordon Kahl. And it got to the point where they said, we believe you, but if you want to go the extra mile and prove yourself, we'll offer you a polygraph. And I was scared because I'd never in a law enforcement academy or anywhere taken a polygraph, but I took it. And I passed it. The investigator said, you were a truthful person. So during all this, not only are we in fear for our lives, we're being accused of being part of the program, because these people that are full of hate saw the opportunity to make life miserable, and they did.
And now, after all this kind of started winding down a little bit, did you follow media reports and get to see what they were saying about your town, about you, and about the whole incident before this actually got to court? I mean, was it all bad, or was there any truthful reporting or fair reporting?
There was some fair reporting, but 10% was fair. 90% was skewed. It was really pro-Fed, anti-Kahl. You know, instead of telling the story, it was, this guy is a murderer. He's not a patriot. He's a murderer. And it didn't go into a lot of the facts. And as time has gone on in the last 26 years, and as the facts come out, people go, wow, we didn't know he stood for this, or we didn't know he stood for that, and we're still against him killing. But then once they understand the heart attack issue, they're going, oh, now we understand. But I'm still shafted from all the stuff that happened. People don't want to know the truth. They just want to keep hating me.
You mentioned another very real truism about something. If somebody says something in the media bad about you, it takes like 9 true articles to maybe counteract that.
Yeah, it's 17, according to some study.
Really?
I can't remember where the study was
They actually
from,
studied it, huh? Wow.
When somebody bashes you once, it takes 17 good reports to overcome the one. Well, I had about 30 hits, so 30 times 17 is a lot.
And I was talking to you off the off the show here, and I told you I ran for political office here statewide in Missouri, and I've had that happen to me, so I can definitely feel what you're saying and concur with that. And we know now through, thanks to the internet, and they call it the alternative media, but I consider myself, excuse me, and many other people, I consider ourselves the real media, because we're actually, I mean, we got you on here for 3 hours to let you tell everything, your side of the story. We heard the federal government side of the story. The media story's been out there. This is your side, the side you didn't get to tell in the media, on TV, probably, I guess, in court. What happened actually in the court? Did you ever have to go to court and testify in any way?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. The hardest 10 minutes of my life was probably during the shootout. The hardest 3 hours of my life was testifying. I was on the stand from like 9 in the morning till noon, as I recall. And when they got done, when the defense attorneys got done, I think I had trouble getting out of the witness chair and walking out of the courthouse. It was that physically and psychologically trying. I can't describe how absolutely beat up I was. And
whose witness were you? Whose witness were you?
That?
Whose witness were you? Were you defense? Or
I was the government's witness.
Okay.
And the defense attorneys, there was 5 of them, and I got riddled from one end to the other. And I understand now, after leaving law enforcement back then, and then I went to work for some defense attorneys in the mid to late 80s, well after this. And I understood why the defense attorneys asked the questions they did and why they were so rough on me. They wanted to find out if I was lying about anything, and it turns out I wasn't.
Sure.
You know, and okay, you had mentioned that they told their side of the story, and now it's my turn to tell my side. But really, the story I tell is just the truth.
That's right. Well, yeah, once in a while when you hear the word story as a connotation, like it's your take, it's your belief, it's your spin. But really the story, at least when me and you grew up, a story was just that. It was, what can you tell me?
Yeah, this is what happened. That's right.
Unfortunately, everything's a spin. Yeah.
So I didn't take your statement with any disrespect whatsoever, but I did want to kind of bring it up that people have said, well, whose side of this case are you on?
That's true.
And I said, I'm on my side of the case.
It's a very minor point to bring up, but it has very big implications. Now,
it's just the truth.
Now, so after you got out of being fired and stuff, what did you do for employment? I imagine this had something to do with you having trouble getting employment. I know Steve, you said, had trouble.
Yes. We were both marked people, and we had applied at different places, and every time Steve wrote down Medina Police Department on his resume or his job application, he wouldn't get the job. So one day he conveniently left it off, and he got hired instantly, and he's been there 26 years now. And it turns out that there's one of the people that was part owner of the company that he really got along well with, who actually had some former experience with Gordon Kahl and liked him. And he, once he found out that Steve had joined their company, they got to be pretty close friends. And this guy was a well-known person in the Fargo area that you would just be astonished to know that he had known Gordon and had hunted around his place and
so there were actually people that like Gordon still around then. That's pretty interesting after all that's been said.
Yes, it was. And there was various places. I never applied in any law enforcement position because even if the agency or the policeman deep down knew I was right and knew I tried to prevent trouble, this was guilty by association, so that if somebody would have hired me, I'm sure that I would have been like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I wouldn't have got invited to any of the reindeer games.
Oh, well, I guess not. That's a way to put it.
It sure would have been that way.
So, yeah, you've been more like the turkey on the Thanksgiving table, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
to use the holidays up.
It's real easy to get set up. Let's suppose some agency let's suppose I would have applied at a 15 or 20-man department. Well, it's pretty easy to get set up in law enforcement. If you're working with somebody that don't like you, they can do all kinds of weird things to you.
So is this? So do you still have this this going on where you're still to this day having people that you might meet or talk to, and this story comes up, or maybe you don't even mention it, and you get the cold shoulder?
Absolutely. More often than you'd ever think. If this state was highly populated, like Florida or California, I could go anywhere and do anything, and nobody would know and nobody would care. But in a state of 600,000 people, those that are under 25 years old, under 30 years old, unless they've read about the story recently or followed up on it or read about it in a history class in their high school or college.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, they don't know much about it. But those that are over about 35 years old, big problems, huge problems. Oh, you're that guy. I applied for a position that I was highly qualified for here in the Bismarck area, and if you can believe this, they were taking the top 5 candidates and giving them an interview, and I ranked 3rd because they made a mistake and didn't give me the points, or I would have ranked 2nd, only because I wasn't a veteran and didn't have the 5 points veterans preference. But because of my involvement in the call shootout, I was not given an interview, and you don't know how bad that hurts for 22 years after a situation to be shafted and not even allowed to interview.
That is amazing.
It's
unforgiven for something you shouldn't be forgiven for in the first place.
That's right. There's
really
people
terrible.
There's people. The same position I was applying for, it was fire service related. There was a fire chief in our community. In fact, in my county, a paid fire chief who had him and an off-duty cop robbed a jewelry store, and then he went to prison for a year. And when he gets out, years later, he becomes fire chief of the community. And here I am, the guy that tried every trick in the book to keep these two factions from getting together, and that didn't work, and then tried to mitigate the situation by having emergency responders on hand and ready to go, did everything that I could by the book. And the FBI said, we've unturned every stone, and everything you've done has been, prudent by the book, good common sense, good judgment. Yet I get this held against me when I apply for a job. It's like, talk about a downer.
Now you're living in Bismarck now, right?
That's correct.
And
yes.
how far is that from where you used to live?
70 miles.
How's Bismarck? How's Bismarck to you?
Well, it depends on where I go. Bismarck's a very political town. Mm-hmm. If I was running for some type of political office, it doesn't even pay to start.
Now Bismarck that's the state capital, isn't it?
That's the capital. That's correct.
Okay, so yeah, it'd be a very political town for sure.
Very political. That's right. And there's, I know there's people in the neighborhood that know who I am, and they're kind, and I'm kind with them, and I have a good rapport with all the neighbors and so on. But I also know that there's people out there that would sooner kill me than look at me because they think that I should have been out there helping kill a farmer, and how one more guy would have made the difference, and the feds would have won instead of the farmer winning at that time. And so it's a very, very difficult life. Now
we got about 10 minutes, and just want to touch on a few things here. So overall, you mentioned that this, when I'm talking to you, it seems like this happened yesterday or last week, and I think you mentioned that too, that it seems like no matter how far down the road it goes, it seems like just yesterday or last week.
You're right. In fact, I could tell you what I had for noon lunch the day this all happened. That's how vivid it is in my memory, and that's certainly part of the post-traumatic stress disorder, the flashbacks. And, here's kind of something that's a little unique about the case. Schnabel took a bullet through the leg, and although he had a flesh wound, he patched that up and healed up and came out of it psychologically very well. The incident itself wasn't near as bad on me as the aftermath of being accused falsely, of being suspected, of being denied jobs, denied civil rights. And I would like nothing more than to find a civil rights attorney that, you hear about these people getting civil rights attorneys and making things happen, and I can't find one in North Dakota. But would I like to talk to a civil rights attorney? Because there's some people that need to squeal because this is over.
Had Steve suffered the same kind of situation as you with people doing things? I mean, you mentioned about the job thing, but does he still, do you guys stay in touch? Does he still have to go through this stuff like you do? Or?
Oh, yeah. Steve and I are very close friends, always have been and always will be. And Steve, he's at his job. He wasn't on the news very much. His name was brought up very little because the big thing they talked about was the dead federal agents. They didn't mention much about the wounded local deputy sheriff and the wounded local lawman, Steve Schnabel. Mm-hmm. So he really kind of lucked out on all this by not having the impact and the stress, although when he got fired right along with us, and in fact the night we were getting fired, I said, look, Mayor, fire me, but don't fire the rest of the department, or especially Schnabel. The poor guy should be getting a Purple Heart for taking a bullet. He doesn't need to be fired. That's like the Vietnamese, when the people came back from the Vietnam War and were getting spit on at the airports for doing their job for our government. And that's exactly the way we were treated, is we did the best we could with what we had to work with, and we're absolutely slaughtered by our city commission, except for our police commissioner, who is a total saint.
I'm going to read a couple of things that you mentioned in your book that are pertinent today and shows your view on how you look at some of this law enforcement stuff. And here's your quote. As I look back, the field of law enforcement is little to be desired by most of the general public. True public servants never forget that they are just that, servants of the public. The honest cops are the ones you can deal with, the ones that try a little harder, the ones that seldom use the phrase, there is not much we can do about it. On the other hand, there are the holier-than-thou breed who are much too commonplace, and it's getting worse every year. I am convinced some of the academy classes are designed to make robots out of the people, then place them on the street as cops with little regard for anything but the rules as written, with no regard for common sense and application of law. Remember, it's all about power. More arrests mean more court backlog, which means more attorney, which means more judges, more judicial system employees, and many problems can be handled without government interference. Family matters can often be handled within the family, but not when a cop without common sense arrives on the scene. And then one other one. there is generally a power struggle. And when you think about it, why wouldn't there be? The cops that are eager to get to the top at any cost will pull all the stops to overcome their competitors. More and more police officers are forgetting they are servants, not masters. Ask any cop. He or she can relate to this within their department. The power-hungry individuals that get on a department so they can oppress their employer, the public, will by nature do what they can to get more and more power. That power comes from rising within the department structure from the bottom to the top. Remember, it's all about power. Mao Zedong is widely quoted as having said, power comes out of the barrel of a gun. And that's the name of your book. It's All About Power by Darrell Graf and Steve Schnabel. Darrell's last name is spelled Graf. And there's also a movie that you recommend, which is called Death and Taxes.
That's correct.
And the one, Bitter Harvest, is the one that's kind of got a bad slant on it, you think, right?
Yeah, that's pretty bogus.
And you can find this on YouTube, and you can find It's All About Power on Amazon. And so what are you doing these days?
Well, I actually work for a company out of Houston and Galveston that do ship fires worldwide. I'm a marine firefighter.
Marine as in water, or marine as in...
As in water,
okay.
As in water.
All right.
Yep. Ship fires, barge fires. And I actually have a team of people in North Dakota and a few that live in neighboring states, South Dakota and so on, Minnesota, that it's kind of like a volunteer fire department where I keep these people trained for marine-type firefighting, and then if we get a call, we'll respond anywhere in the world on behalf of this company. And that's kind of a part-time thing for me. I'm not really able to do full-time. The post-traumatic stress disorder interferes
I was
a great
just going to
deal
ask you about that.
with things that I try to do, although my heart is always in the right place. It's just that sometimes the rest of me can't.
So, I mean, have you been diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress?
Oh, yes, way back when this happened, and we've tried all kinds of things to overcome it, and it's just, if it was related to the incident and it was over with, it would probably be something that we could finally get behind me, but, it keeps coming up. If I apply for a job, or if I, walk in a restaurant and all of a sudden things get quiet, oh, yeah, there's that guy, and
right.
He was in that call mess and on, and it's just stuff that keeps coming up over and over is just almost unbearable. So I do the best I can with what I have to work with. I got a wife and a little 11-year-old daughter, and
were you married at the time?
I just try hard.
Were you married at the time? Were you married at the time this happened?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
I wasn't. In fact, it really messed up my ability to get involved in a relationship because there were so many people I couldn't trust. I didn't get married till I was 42 years old.
My
so
goodness. You missed out on a lot of years that you probably would have been
missed out
married.
on a lot of years of where everybody else is out doing the right stuff and having kids. Here we are.
Do you suffer like anxiety attack type things? I mean, you don't have to talk about this. This is private matter, but if you want to, you can. But what can you say about it? How it affects your daily life?
I can tell you this. There's like 15 symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and I've got all of them.
Oh my goodness!
And they do interfere with day-to-day operations on certain things, and other things I can actually focus. If I can get focused on something, I can really do well at it. But a lot of times when I'm under pressure, I'll use this example. When you walk into a TV store, and you'll see 30 TVs on the wall, and they're all on the same channel. Okay? Imagine if each one was on a different channel. And now try to concentrate.
Yeah, what do you do first, right?
Well, that's right. And it's...
what's important?
Yeah, it's like, oh,
that's scary.
Man.
That's scary.
So stuff that's very easy for other people to do, it's to be quite a task for me to prioritize. And the other thing I have a little trouble with is... like if I know something, I can teach it, or like this story we've been discussing here, the truth, I can tell it. But if I was to sit down and try to read a book and tell you what was in that book, I have a terrible time.
Well, yeah, your mind wanders, but when you're the one engaged, there's a different type of brain activity that goes on. I think when you're talking or reading or watching something, there's a different level of brain activity, I believe, that they say goes on. We know that's true. When you read a book, it's like, Oh, I got to read that paragraph again. I hear that all the time. I hear it from people
Yes.
at church and everywhere. I just can't focus, and that happens. But you've been.
Oh, it does.
I mean, I hope this has helped you, and I know it's been a long time. I hope this didn't open any wounds, because I just came across the story about 4 years ago, and I didn't know about your book, so I seen the video, and I forgot how I found the video, but I found the book, and then I read the book, and then I found that you were still around, and you were gracious enough to spend 3 hard hours of your time with us, and once again, it's all about power. Watch the movie Death and Taxes by Darrell Graf is his name. Graciously going back into history and bringing something forward that probably was a little difficult, but we hope it was therapeutic. And my name's Ernest Cann. We're with the Sons .info. So if you got any thing you want to send our way, please do. Any comments or questions, you can find Mr. Darrell Graf on there. I'm going to try to link you up with something for him. And thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.